Stop. Friendly fire. Chapter 18 to 19. Chapter 18 Core Destroyer. The large force of undead probably consisted of wandering skeletons from outside the commercial city. Shin Woo acted calm and spoke whilst nodding his head. Is the reason that you're leaving now because? To be honest, even after becoming level 6, I couldn't completely give up on this field. However, once I learned of the impending undead force, I completely gave up on it. I asked Lloyd for his opinion, but he thought that this force may be troops under the 12 generals' command. You see, a force that large and disciplined is not that common. Not only is a corps under the 12 generals' command dangerous, but there's also the possibility that they could get involved with the 12 generals themselves if something went wrong. Therefore, it would be a good idea to avoid them for now. When Shin Woo heard her say all that, he honestly couldn't believe it. They're pretty much giving us an opportunity to find out more about the 12 generals, but you're just going to throw that all away. If he fought against the corps under the 12 generals' command, he'd not only gain a ton of information, but he might cause some sort of change amongst the 12 generals by facing off against their force, which would be a huge advantage in and of itself. There was nothing he could do if there were other heroes nearby, but he could at least consult the chatting channel once beforehand. Shin Woo thought about mentioning it, but ultimately didn't express his doubts aloud. Arian's vibe wouldn't permit it. Fortunately, we still have some time before they arrive. I'm not bragging, but we elves have sharp eyes, so I could tell early on that they were on the move. Since it's a huge corps, they should take at least 4 days before they pass by here. What direction are they coming from? So, share your minimap with me. They should be around here. Shin Woo just laughed when he saw the coordinates she'd marked on his minimap. It did feel like this was what was happening, but those coordinates were extremely close to the commercial city, Kahabi, that he had left from. I see. We should leave before we encounter them. That's a relief. I was concerned that you might say you'd fight them. I'm well aware of my limitations. I know the difference between courage and foolhardiness. I'm glad. It seems like I'll be seeing you for a very long time. Despite sounding somewhat pissed, Shin Woo nevertheless replied as though he'd made up his mind. Hearing that, Arian was genuinely relieved and smiled simply. She also proposed a place worth going to. There's a highlands in the west that's filled with level 4 bronze golems. To be honest, I wanted to hunt them, but they aren't a good match for me. Moreover, I want to join up with Lloyd as fast as possible, so I'll give up the spot to my junior. You're probably already well aware of this, but one golem is connected to all the others in the group, so lure them well and destroy them. Thank you. This was likely extremely generous for a hero who wandered around looking for strong foes. Of course, Shin Woo knew more about these highlands than anyone, but he just acted like he was thankful for now. Arian nodded her head in satisfaction and extended her hand to him. I pray that we meet again someday. It'd be nice if Jin was with us then. Yes, I hope we all stay safe until that day comes. Shin Woo unhesitatingly stretched his hand forward and shook her hand. Arian felt the warmth of a human from his hand, as well as the sense of comfort and peace she would feel whenever she came across another hero. She smiled once again in relief, feeling that she wasn't the only one clinging on to life and struggling in this world filled with death. Seeing that, Shin Woo responded with his own smile, confirming that he had indeed fooled her, and the two parted ways amicably. Shin Woo, what are you going to do now? Do you think that girl's already left? Arian led them outside and parted ways. Shin Woo and Jin ran towards the West Highlands, and when they were sure that they were outside the range of Arian's hearing, Jin spoke. Naturally, he was talking about both her and Kracia. I feel like Kracia will just butt heads with anyone who comes her way. Yeah, it's a relief since it would have been difficult to hunt with just the two of us. Jin spoke nonchalantly and Shin Woo chuckled. From the very beginning, he never intended on simply running away like Arian had suggested. Jin was already well aware that there was no way Shin Woo would back off without even knowing their enemy's number and levels. Then don't we need to hurry back to the city? That girl wouldn't know if we change directions now. We don't know how long Kraisha will be able to hold them off. You don't need to worry about Kraisha, since I already sent reinforcements. The moment Shin Woo realized that an undead corps would invade Kahabi, he ordered the 3 iron golems to use the underground passageway to return to the city. If the golems were there, it wouldn't be too difficult for her to protect herself and fight off the undead. But we don't know how large the corps is, so I'm thinking of sending over some shields as well. Shields? What are you? Ah. As expected, Jin was quick on the uptake. When he thought about it, they were headed towards the highlands, where the bronze golems lay dormant. From the start, the reason Shin Woo had followed Arian's words to the letter was because of that. We'll arrive soon, so get ready. It doesn't even feel like it's been a few minutes. You're frighteningly fast. No matter how often he experienced Jin's speed, it was always a thrilling and new experience. They arrived in the highlands instantly. The nearest bronze golem noticed them and stood up. At that moment, the steelworker seal floated atop his palm, as if he were an inspector taking out his badge. Welcome, steelworker. Welcome. Welk. At the same time, he heard the golems' voices resound in various parts of the highlands. As expected, they seemed to be exactly the same in this one aspect when compared to the iron golems. Shin Woo saw all of the numerous bronze golems speak in the same voice and stand up. He then immediately commanded them. Sprint mode. Release mana limiter. Releasing mana limiter. Miniaturizing body as much as possible in order to use sprint mode. Unfortunately, the bronze golems didn't have the ability to significantly downsize their bodies like the iron golems. Instead, there was a command that caused them to remove their armaments and run faster than before. He placed those armaments into Jin's inventory since he still had space. That speed was truly quick. It was as if they were running a simulation. Jin was speechless and just kept his inventory open. After placing all of their armaments into Jin's inventory, Shin Woo turned around and yelled vigorously. Nice. Then let's go to the city now. Following steelworker. You're always going beyond my expectations. Hundreds of bronze golems were forcefully following behind a running horse whilst Shin Woo maintained a human disguise. That's because there was the possibility that Aryan Ruparte could be following behind them. However, around the halfway point, they were absolutely sure that Aryan Ruparte had completely left the area, so Shin Woo released his disguise. Seeing that, Jin asked, Shin Woo, are you going to keep acting like a human from now on? At least when we encounter heroes, yeah. Wouldn't it be easier for us if I acted like a human in front of them? So long as he possessed a means to disguise himself as a human being, there was no need to approach as an undead and make them feel repulsed. Instead, it would be better to pretend like he was a human. It was fine to interpret that as their inferiority complex. He was doing well as a skeleton hero, and was satisfied with himself now. If someone else sympathized with him in this regard, he wouldn't be able to take it. He didn't want nor need pointless hostility or consideration. Yeah, he didn't want to feel inferior to the other heroes. Though there's nothing I can do about people like Kraisha or Jin who already know, but I suppose I've been lucky. Whether it be good or bad, the two of them both were unaffected by the underground empire. Well, they were newbie heroes, so it made sense that he could meet them. While he was on the topic, Shin Woo requested a private chat with Jin and told her that he not only met Aryan Ruparte, but also successfully fooled her and hid his identity. Hearing that, she got worked up and bothered him by asking how he managed to fool her, but he didn't have the time to respond. I feel a living being's energy. There's an impudent living being occupying a castle of the empire. Attack. For our ever-glorious empire, that living being, we must kill any who rebels against the empire. Jin had already arrived at the castle walls, where an intense battle was taking place. The 3 iron golems were spread out in a line and in the center of the castle gates, and were taking a beating. Countless undead were charging at them and attacking them in order to get into the city. Whoa! Jin, who'd confirmed the size of the enemy force, spoke discouragingly. It was a huge force of more than 10,000 troops. Though they had defeated about 10,000 soldiers inside the city, the quality of these soldiers was worlds apart. It makes sense that Aryan ran away. Shin Woo could understand why she assumed it was a force directly under the command of the 12 generals. He couldn't believe his eyes. Unbelievably, they were all at least level 3. There was one level 4 skeleton knight in command of every 100 level 3s. Also, 10 of those knights were commanded by one level 5. He could understand what discipline meant now. Even if a few heroes worked together, they couldn't defeat a force of this size very easily. Undead loyal to the Empire. A powerful living being is inside the city. We should give them the gift of eternal life as well. Eternal life, the light of the Empire. But there was something more important above all of them. There was a level 6 elite in the rear giving orders to the entire army and was guarded by level 5s. Shin Woo took a glimpse at the elite. It was seemingly a magician. Shin Woo, what are you going to do? For starters, let's take down the leader. Yeah, I thought you'd say something like that. Since he'd gotten to level 5, Shin Woo's confidence soared. It wasn't even very long since he'd said that he didn't want to fight head-to-head against a level 6 opponent, yet here he was suggesting that they take down a level 6 elite. Of course, Shin Woo had something in mind. If he was up against a physically powerful knight, he would have used his Avenger skill and fought after making various preparations. However, what if his enemy was a magician? A magician, whose magic was much higher than their health, honestly lacked in attack power, and he felt as though he could kill it. Though that impenetrable wall of knights guarding him is a problem. Meanwhile, the undead corps were blindly charging the castle walls. Shin Woo instructed Jin to throw all of the bronze golems' armaments onto the floor and ordered the golems to equip them once more. Before the undead corps noticed them, Shin Woo and the golems went their separate ways. The golems dashed forward towards the city walls, while Shin Woo and Jin aimed for their leader. Let's distract them with the golems and kill their leader. Will it be okay? It's a really simple plan. I originally thought about using the golems to take care of those knights, but we should be fine. I don't know about the undead army, but Krasia should have noticed us by now. The moment Shin Woo said so, an enormous clump of ice rose into the air. It was Krasia's catalyst magic. But doesn't it look a bit different from last time? It'd be nice if Krasia knew what I was aiming for, but for now. Jin, run! Shadow sprint. Who? Alright. I'd only die once anyway. Let's go. This was how frightening it was to get used to taking risks. When Shin Woo and Jin were far enough from the golems, Shin Woo simultaneously activated Shadow Sprint and Assimilation. They were instantaneously concealed within the darkness and began to run towards the leader. If they were the only ones here, the undead with good senses might have discovered them, but because of the huge clump of ice in the sky, none of the undead were watching their surroundings. And to add to that, following Steelworker's command, we will lay down our lives to defeat Steelworker's enemies. He activated the final command inputted in the Bronze Golem's core release, causing the Bronze Golems to dash towards the undead core. By melting the core, which both produced and managed their mana, they would temporarily be able to exhibit more than their maximum power, and only those with the Steelworker seal could order them to do so. Golems! Stop them! The golems are going crazy! No, this isn't enough. Shin Woo had already taken out his Drake Horn Lance, gripped it, and grit his teeth. Despite the sudden change in the battlefield, the knights didn't show any signs of moving from the magician's side. Even if the bronze golems exploded all at once and attacked the knights, what would happen if they couldn't break through? When an ambush is no longer an ambush, it becomes a greeting at best. If they got surrounded by the knights, then it would get tough for even Shin Woo. A level 6 magician's spells would be even more troublesome. Grand Ice Spear! Ha! However, when Shin Woo was thinking about how he would get past the knights and attack the magician, the floating clump of ice slowly began to change its form. Hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of ice crystals stuck to the clump of ice and formed into a single enormous spear. It wasn't a large-scale spell meant to attack the entire undead core. That overwhelmingly cold clump of ice was aiming for only one enemy. It was aiming for none other than this army's leader, the ghoul wizard. Is that her way of saying that she won't lose it to us? Maybe. Probably not. The knights, who protected the magician, tensed and drew their swords. They changed their battle formation, and now there were skeleton magicians in between the knights. Shin Woo exerted strength into his grip, and now all he needed was the right opportunity. In any case, there's one thing I'm sure of. Shin Woo aimed his lance at the magician's head, stiffened his chin, and smiled. We'll start this battle off by taking out the leader. Around the time Kraisha was able to somewhat use the limited order bone core, the core vibrated and the 3 iron golems came back. She obviously thought that Shin Woo and Jin would return with them, but that wasn't the case. Steelworker ordered us to return first and protect Kraisha Meloy. Henceforth, we will obey the core's orders. Our top priority is to protect Kraisha Meloy. Shin Woo's not back and it's just you guys. She wanted a more detailed explanation, but so long as the golems had their orders, they wouldn't say anything more. Still, if there was one thing she realized, it was that Shin Woo was worried about her safety and had sent the golems to protect her. In other words, something dangerous was coming towards this city. As long as I know that, it's fine. Then, she drew out her magic and focused on the orb of eternal ice, the growing ice artifact she'd gotten from God. 1 second of her preparation would mean the death of 100 enemy soldiers. When she was almost finished with her task, she sensed the huge force of undead on the move. Not only was it indeed a huge army, but she could easily tell that each and every one of the undead were elites. How did Shin Woo know about this? No, I shouldn't be surprised at this point. Kraisha thought of that villainous skeleton and shook her head. She thought that what he'd shown her thus far was certainly impressive, but she was well aware that there was a lot he still hadn't shown her. However, what was most impressive was his imagination and his mental condition, which allowed him to limitlessly expand the ways in which he could use magic. If he was a magician, he would have been a legend. It was so unfortunate. Kraisha clicked her tongue and meticulously examined the undead force. The force was mostly comprised of level 3 undead, which she didn't need to worry about, but she had to be a bit on guard against the level 4 skeleton knights and skeleton magicians. Obviously more so when it came to the level 5 elder knights. Protect the front gates. Keeping that safe is the same as keeping me safe. Judged as a rational command. Following order. Following the core's command. Kraisha realized that it would become tough for her if the undead got through the front gates and into the city, so she hurriedly commanded the iron golems. Shin Woo had already released all their limitations, so even if the elder knights attacked them all at once, they would last for several minutes. She dispatched the golems and stood atop the walls, but when she noticed the level 6 elite, her face stiffened. Its skin was extremely pale, like an emissary of death, but its body was filled with mana. It was neither a zombie nor a skeleton. If it wasn't for the artificial sunlight, she might have thought it wasn't dead. It barely retained what could be considered a human form, and the power she sensed from the undead was considerable. A ghoul. That's a ghoul. Plus, it's eaten several corpses and regained its reasoning. When I consider that magic pattern, could it be a ghoul wizard? The ghoul wizard was located furthest in the back and was guarded by level 5 elder knights, so that couldn't just be a coincidence. At that moment, Kraisha realized how dangerous this core was. They not only had a solid system of command, but also a clear goal. It wasn't an army that had turned undead, but rather, an army composed of undead. Of course, the undead that inhabited this city, Kahabi, had relied on their memories to maintain an army, but the difference between this city's undead and them was like the difference between a sleepwalking patient and a normal person. If that's the case, I have to take out the leader first. If he gets closer to the walls, it'll become tough. But because those knights are guarding him like an impenetrable wall, there was no way to retreat. It would all be decided with a single spell between magicians. If she couldn't kill him with her spell, she would lose. Currently, she'd discovered the enemy first, and had already gathered her magic, so Kracia looked like she was in the lead, but it was already prepared for an ambush, as the knights guarded it. No matter how she attacked, she would have to deal with the knights first. If that's the case, did she even have a means of dealing with both the knights and the wizard in a single blow? It would be possible if she developed her catalyst magic some more, but she had just created the spell, so that was impossible right now. If Shin Woo were level 6, he would have been able to do it. Kracia thought she wouldn't lose to anyone in terms of talent, but she naturally thought this. She was just amused with herself. However, she also thought that if she didn't accept reality, she wouldn't be able to progress in the future. Because of that, rather than feeling inferior, she felt a greater desire to improve herself. When a magician accepts that something is not impossible, they are then able to make the impossible possible. He sent the golems already, so Shin Woo should be coming. If that's the case, I just need to last until he comes. I can keep them from getting close to the walls by using my catalyst magic. She didn't even think about running away. Kracia was fundamentally a hero, and diligently performed her duty as one. Plus, she wasn't the type to get scared when she didn't even know how the battle would turn out. Crush the golems. The golems protecting the living are our enemies. Executing the trespasser. Then, the undead vanguard clashed with the golems. Of course, level 3 undead couldn't beat the golems and were helplessly crushed, but the problem was that there were thousands of them attacking. Sup, it can't be helped. Kracia grit her teeth and came forward. Her eternal ice floated in the air, and the mana in the entire area was influenced by her own. She would stop them, even if it meant freezing the entire wall. However, as she bravely resolved herself, she saw something. Golems. Hundreds of level 4 golems were charging with considerable speed. Were they aiming for the wall? No way. Their destination was clear. They locked on to the level 4 and level 5 knights and were attacking them. There were way too many of them to just make a dent in their formation. Then that means... Kracia hurriedly turned her gaze. She had studied his magic for the past 10 days, so she could sense a faint presence from beyond. He was not fighting together with the golems. Shin Woo was charging straight for the leader. He really is bold. There's bold, and then there's Shin Woo bold. She thought that if she were to tell Shin Woo that, she would get hit, and instantaneously modified her spell. She knew now that both of their goals were the same, so she had no reason to hesitate. If they both struck the boss, one of them should succeed. Grand Ice Spear. Her miraculous artifact absorbed the world's mana, and gradually chilled the area. Through her deep study of magic, she could agglomerate mana and change it with frighteningly high efficiency. Finally, using those two as a catalyst, she changed the world's mana and clumped it together, creating a giant ice spear that went beyond a level 6 ability. Hup! After taking a short, deep breath, she poured all of her mana into the ice spear and shot it in a straight line towards the wizard. The mid-air ice spear homed in on the ghoul wizard's magic and sped up like crazy. The living being's attack is coming. Move it. As you command. We're protecting the 3rd Corps commander. Get to your positions. Don't look down on our defense zone. The elder knights in Kahabi had looked as though they had run off far away. On the other hand, when these elder knights heard the ghoul's command, they really did look like knights of the Empire, as they stepped forward to protect the Corps commander. They would eliminate anything that came in close proximity to their defense zone. If one knight couldn't cover an area by himself, another knight would help, creating a tight perimeter around the Corps commander. That was the reason the Empire's knights were powerful. A defense zone. I knew about this since I've roughly absorbed their memories, but I suppose that's how you make it, huh? Even Shin Woo, who was running straight for the magician, was impressed seeing them. At the same time, he thought that he'd be able to add an element to that to make an even more perfect defense. At the very least, there was some value in trying it out once. But not now. Finally, the Grand Ice Spear struck their defensive zone. The knights at the forefront died without a trace, without even being given a chance to retaliate. However, The knights on standby behind them shaved a bit of it with their spears, and the third row of elder knights were able to cut even more of it, managing to slow down the speed of the grand ice spear. Knights who pledged their loyalty to the Empire. We will attain victory through your sacrifice. Show that impudent living being how frightening and powerful black magic is. The ghoul wizard watched as the knights were sacrificed and began casting a spell. He traced the ice spear back to its source, Kracia, and was casting a spell to intercept her. However, right before he completed the spell, while the knights were busy with the ice spear, Shin Woo forcefully shot his lance at the completely wide-open ghoul wizard's back. I see your back, KKKKKKKKKK. All the conditions for his ambush had been met. From the start, the ghoul wizard's target wasn't Shin Woo, but the living being, Kracia. His subordinates were busy with the iron golems, bronze golems, or the grand ice spear, so they couldn't check their surroundings, and the ghoul wizard was likewise busy casting a spell to intercept Kracia. Furthermore, his shadow sprint, using assimilation as a base, was much too perfect such that even Shin Woo lost sight of where he was. However, so there was an undead who wasn't loyal to the Empire. Despite that, the split second that Shin Woo threw his lance, the ghoul wizard diverted all of his magic to defense and blocked Shin Woo's attack. To be more exact, the ghoul wizard possessed an ability that automatically diverted his mana to defense when it was hit. The spell seemed to consume at least 30% of his mana, but he still had an awful lot of mana. Critical hit. Dozens of layers of mana shields formed in the extremely small gap between the ghoul wizard's head and the lance. The force behind the lance, as well as bursting thunder's lightning, was cancelled out by the shields. The moment they crashed into another, at least half of the shields instantly broke and the remaining shields broke one by one. But at this time, Shin Woo realized that his ambush had failed. That's because there wasn't enough force remaining in the lance to pierce through the wizard's head and kill him. Damn it. As expected of a level 6 enemy, Shin Woo gritted his teeth and prepared to follow through. In the middle of preparing his next attack, the ghoul wizard pushed aside the lance before his head and yelled as loud as he could. Protect me from that coward who ambushed me from the rear. How about this? Kuyak! However, the knights didn't come back in time. The lance broke through all of the shields and had seemingly lost all of its power, yet somehow forcefully shot forward like a cannonball. The ghoul wizard was pushed into the air. Obviously, this was done through Shin Woo's rule of bone. This was the result of him controlling the bone. You bastard DDDDDDDDDDD. The ghoul wizard had invested all its mana into the shields, so he couldn't resist properly, and was thrown into the air. In an instant, the lance pushed the ghoul hundreds of meters into the air. That sight was akin to seeing fireworks being shot into the sky. Man, that ghoul sure is flying. Rescue the Corps Commander. The knights who had survived the Grand Ice Spear didn't think about attacking the ambusher, Shin Woo. Rather, they each jumped into the air to save the Corps Commander. When they became about level 5, they may not be able to use magic, but they could at least jump hundreds of meters high no problem. A few of the knights were able to jump high enough to barely touch the Corps Commander with their hands. Obviously, at that time, Shin Woo exploded the lance. With all of the mana he had left remaining. Critical hit. The explosion was truly magnificent. The lance, tinged in his dark red mana, split into hundreds of thousands of pieces and scattered. Since the lance had already pierced halfway through him, the ghoul couldn't block at all, and broke into bits and pieces. The nearby elder knights were also heavily injured and helplessly fell to the ground. Shin Woo looked up at the fancy explosion, seemingly blinded from it, and spoke enthusiastically. Man, you really got to look at fireworks from below. It doesn't matter whether you look at it from below or from the side. Remember, that thing ain't a firework. Jin, who had focused all his efforts into charging with Shin Woo, replied in a discouraged voice. They'd somehow managed to kill the Corps Commander. All he had to do now was to somehow get through this outrageous number of undead with no mana and get away. With superb teamwork, you and your comrade managed to ambush and kill a Corps Commander of 10,000. All stats have increased by 2. The low-rank command skill has become LV9. The moment they were sure of the Corps Commander's demise, Shin Woo moved quickly, as he didn't have a moment to spare to read the message. They had one thing left to do before the knights and soldiers surrounded them: collect the loot. I don't have any mana, so I'm counting on you, Jin. We have to collect it all before we leave. You're such a slave driver. Grab him and bring him to his knees before he escapes. We cannot bring shame to Sir Medifal's name. He'd killed the Corps Commander, who had been in the middle of them, right before their very non-existent eyes, so the knights who were responsible for guarding him were enraged. At the very least, it was a relief that most of the level 5 knights were dead, but the entire force was concentrated on Shin Woo and Jin, so how could Shin Woo even suggest that they collect all of the loot and get through them? Even so, we have to get the loot. Sup, I guess it can't be helped. Jin resolved himself and sprinted at full speed towards the glittering perium and bones that fell from the sky. He utilized Steel Heart to create sharp horns atop his head, and plowed through the skeletons that swarmed them from all sides. Jin's considerable speed, as well as the cutting force behind Steel Heart, worked as one, destroying level 4 skeleton knights with ease. It was such a cheat skill that he wouldn't have to be jealous of most other heroes' blessing. Now, jump! Hup! It truly goes to show how far the Drake Horn Lance had pushed the Corps Commander and the Elder Knights into the air as the loot they left behind was still falling from the sky. Jin, who somehow managed to move freely through the undead group unscathed, jumped at his signal. With his shocking leg strength, he instantaneously reached the loot. Shin Woo, who had been waiting for that moment, quickly reached out his hand and collected the loot. You have acquired the LV6 Ghoul Wizard, Vita's Skull. You have acquired 950,000 perium. You have acquired LV4 Corrupted Guide's Staff. Through bone reinforcement, the weapon transforms and has become a LV4 Bifurcated Snake Spine. You have acquired the LV5 Skeleton Elder Knight, Veron's Jawbone. You have acquired the LV5 Skeleton Elder Knight, Terrains. Shin Woo firmly planted himself on Jin's back, and then wildly stretched out his hands, holding the loot in his arms whilst inspecting the ground. There were some knights that had followed suit and jumped behind them, as well as soldiers shooting arrows and magicians casting magic at them. With just a quick glance, he could tell all of the undead force was aiming at them. Kill them. The living is our enemy. And that undead. In any case, just kill him. You're already dead. 1. However, Shin Woo stayed firm, despite receiving the murderous looks of more than 10,000 undead. His body, which had been completely empty of mana due to exploding the Drake Horn Lance, was slowly generating new mana. Intermediate Mana Bone was indiscriminately gathering the surrounding mana. Soon, he gathered enough mana to use a skill. And Shin Woo had already chosen what skill he'd use. You'll soon find out who the hell you're messing with. Who? Jin predicted what Shin Woo was going to do, and just decided to not worry about it and be calm. Yeah, it might be better to think about where he needed to land for them to survive after Shin Woo uses his skill. Jin's goblin fire rolled around, and while he looked for the best place to land, Shin Woo finally opened his mouth. You bald-headed bastards! Listen to me. I'm the one who killed your Corps Commander. You're bald too. Even Jin, who had been composed, couldn't help but retort. Shin Woo was forgetting himself. His high-pitched yell resounded far throughout the battlefield, causing more than 3,000 undead to flinch. You used Shriek of the Dead, causing your enemies to fall into a confused and fearful state. You used the skill to great success. With such a perfect provocation, the skill's effectiveness and range have increased. You have succeeded in making a portion of the enemies lose their minds, and their fear temporarily puts them into an obedient state. The low-rank Shriek of the Dead skill has become LV9. Magic has increased by 3. However, Shin Woo invoked 2 unexpected effects. Shriek of the Dead's range was much wider than usual and broke down the minds of the undead in that vast area. Not only that, they were affected by a new status ailment. Bald. See Corps Commander. The Corps Commander is alive. Even Shin Woo, the one who used the skill, couldn't believe what was happening, causing his goblin fire to flicker. The center of the battlefield gradually was filled with shock, terror, and groans. Kuik! Who the hell called me bald? It was you. You still have some hair left. It's a helmet. I'm telling you, it's a helmet. Damn it, you crazy bastard. There were two reasons his skill was such a resounding success. The first was extremely simple. While people weren't really receptive of his compliments, it seemed as though they were more receptive to his insults. They responded more sensitively to his insults, and each and every one of those undead was affected by his skill. Who insulted the Corps Commander? The Corps Commander isn't dead. He's right over there. The Corps Commander has said the word. That we must kill you bastards who are rebelling against the Empire. The second reason was the current situation. The Corps Commander was dead, and Shin Woo tormented them with the term, Corps Commander. As a result, a portion of the confused and fearful undead actually considered Shin Woo the Corps Commander and began mobilizing. This is quite the new discovery. I need to do more research on it. Research? What the hell do you mean research? Shin Woo, who'd originally thought that all he needed to do was scream for Shriek of the Dead, thought that this was a chance to change his mind. Of course, Jin simply thought Shin Woo picked that offensive term to piss off the undead, but was speechless seeing what Shin Woo had wrought. In any case, it's become easier for us to land now. That's true, but hold on tight. A horse is plummeting from the sky. What the hell are you talking about? Kuyak! Jin, who'd already figured out where he'd land, straightened his front two legs and descended. The steel thorns that protruded from the ends of his legs cleaved through the skeletons en route to his landing spot, and they safely landed on the ground. It was truly a clean landing. However, Jin didn't have the time to admire his perfect landing as he started running again. We'll be safe if we get to the spot where the golems are clumped together. Hup! Stop right there, you louts. We'll definitely get revenge for the Corps Commander, Quack. Don't you dare speak the Corps Commander's name with that dirty mouth of yours. It was a skill that targeted thousands of undead. Although it was a resounding success, he couldn't put all of the level 4 skeleton knights in the various areas into a confused state. However, even if there were skeletons unaffected by the Shriek of the Dead, they still didn't possess the ability to restore the sanity of the crazy undead. Even if there were skeletons that were still lucid and attacked Shin Woo and Jin, they would be blocked by the other skeletons. Dark Arrow. Pure darkness. Punish those who have become corrupted and forgotten the curse. Magic. Jin. Dodge. Corps Commander, we'll take care of this. Kuik. Even if they were magically attacked by skeleton wizards, there were similarly some who were afflicted by the obedience status ailment, and would block the magic attack, counterattack, and kill the wizards. Wait a sec. You. Shin Woo gave the signal and Jin instinctually stopped running. They were still quite far off from the golem troops, but he felt like he understood why Shin Woo asked him to stop. Please tell me you're not doing what I think you are. I think I can do it, don't you? But the skill's effect is only temporary. Even so, Jin didn't move an inch. The hostile skeletons that approached in all directions lost their lives to the skeletons who considered them their Corps Commander. Honestly speaking, they didn't really need to run away. Listen, Jin. I'm at an important juncture right now. My skill's potential is limitless, and it's my job to choose which direction the skill develops. I can definitely do it now, like when we'd created the assimilation skill together. I was really proud of the assimilation skill, but hearing you say that makes me hate myself. A skill was like a living organism. Depending on the way it's used, its characteristics, mana, and goal would change. The horseback riding skill, which just made his riding companion run faster, evolving into the ridiculous assimilation skill, and stealth evolving into shadow sprint, was all because of that. And as those skill went from the low rank level to the intermediate level, they went through a dramatic change. Shin Woo thought that Shriek of the Dead could likewise do the same. Maybe this skill will evolve to best match my karma, the Joker. You. Corps Commander. I'll assist you. At that moment, an obedient skeleton knight approached him. Shin Woo looked at him and replied extremely naturally. Rebels have infiltrated into our core. Lead those who will follow your orders and quickly kill them. Once you're done cleaning up, I'll give you your next order. First, understand, Corps Commander. Follow me, proud soldiers of the Empire. Let's go kill those maggots slandering the Corps Commander. Anyone who saw this would think that Shin Woo had been in charge of this corps for about 5 years, as he commanded in such a haughty and firm tone. Shin Woo replied naturally, and the skeleton knight had certainly recognized Shin Woo as his superior, taking a more active role in this battle than before. Corps Commander. How dare you mention the Corps Commander? Kuyak. Corps Commander. Please command me as well. Then, the number of undead willing to follow his orders had increased significantly. Those who had been in a confused and fearful state saw their allies follow his orders and became his troops as well. Yeah, you heard me too, right? Take care of the sane soldiers. Show those traitors the might of the Empire. As you command, I will follow your order. Seeing that, Shin Woo suddenly felt like he saw the confused state in a different light. Until now, he'd used Shriek of the Dead to make the monsters fight amongst themselves, and thought that that was the only way he could use it, but felt like that was completely wrong. I was too complacent. While it was originally a monster's skill, when it became mine it changed. He thought he'd developed in several ways after coming to this world, but he was still far off. If it was him, who possessed both the acting and disguise skills, he should be able to do more than just confuse them, and was speechless at the fact that he'd wasted all the opportunities to do so. But it doesn't matter, since I can just figure it out now. You really are going to start. It still wasn't too late. Especially since Shriek of the Dead was at low rank level 9 and was about to level up, he thought he was lucky. Shin Woo sported a smile and took a stance. The Corps Commander's bone in his hand naturally melted away and was absorbed. Initiating bone reinforcement by consuming the LV6 Ghoul Wizard, Vita's Skull. Magic has increased by 8. The intermediate mana bone skill has become LV3. Magic has increased by 10. Low rank fire element has become LV6. Magic has increased by 6. Absorbing a portion of the target's experiences and memories. General, I'm just a magician, and I'm not good enough to lead one of your corps. If you still wish for me to shoulder such a heavy responsibility, then I can only promise you one thing. Our corps will never lose until the day I die. Mercenary Magician Vitas. It's impossible to perfectly disguise myself as the Ghoul Wizard by just absorbing this bone, but my acting will be much more convincing now. He wondered at what level his disguise skill would have to be for him to perfectly disguise himself by just absorbing a single bone. Shin Woo thought inquisitively and grinned. And then he yelled. Before we are soldiers of the Empire, we are mercenaries who follow the mercenary king, Sir Metoffel. Show those ruffians who dirty that name the strength and ferocity of true mercenaries. You used Shriek of the Dead, causing a portion of the enemies to fall into a confused and fearful state. A resounding success! Most of the enemies who have fallen into a confused and fearful state have become obedient. The skill's range has expanded uncontrollably. He used the information from the absorbed bone and provoked the undead with a single comment, upending the entire battlefield. Ooh! As you command, Corps Commander. The Corps Commander truly is. Metoffel! Metoffel! Shin Woo's comment had confused even the once sane undead. Another factor was that not a lot of undead could see him because there were so many of them. Thus, the chaos spread uncontrollably. Eventually, around 3,000 undead were temporarily placed into an obedient state. This was the moment when the largest civil war since the heroes entered the Empire occurred. What is this? Kraisha's grand magic had fulfilled her objective of killing the knights protecting the Corps Commander, and she safely retrieved the Eternal Ice, which served as the core for the Ice Spear. By the time she had enough time to sigh, the battle had already become a complete mess. Listen up, everyone! Don't even dream of national security if you can't even restore discipline within the army. Show no mercy. Kill those who defy my command. Shin Woo and Kreisha had worked together to kill the Corps commander, and that had gone well, but contrary to her expectations, he didn't run away. Rather, Shin Woo had entered into the undead force and was vigorously spewing out lies. Kreisha gazed at Shin Woo, who looked even more noticeable atop an imposing steel horse. From the outside, Jin looked completely like a steel war horse and was speechless. However, what was even more stunning was the fact that each and every word he said riled up the huge undead force. The Corps commander has given the command. Those who insult the Corps commander are guilty and sentenced to death. Don't listen to that strange skeleton. He's tricking you all right now. To think you're still spouting that nonsense. Kill them. Why were undead he didn't even know following his orders, and why were there so many of them following him? What's worse, whenever Shin Woo shouted, more undead followed his command. Kreisha sensed traces of magic that affected their minds. Why, you fools! Just look at him. He's neither a ghoul nor a magician. How dare you suspect the Corps commander? I feel like a fool for following you until now. He's the Corps commander's enemy too. Execute him in Sir Metaful's name. The high-ranked level 5 undead weren't affected by Shin Woo's shallow machinations, but the problem was their subordinates, who originally followed their orders. Shin Woo boosted their morale through the command skill, and they were unfortunately bewitched by Shin Woo's words and attacked their previous superiors. What is that guy doing? She wasn't saying that because she didn't know what he was doing. She was saying that because she couldn't believe what he'd done. Shin Woo was swaying and breaking up the army through a perverse method. To think he'd be pretending to be the Corps commander after killing him right in front of them, and to think that it was working. Because Shin Woo read the mood and the flow of the battle, he was able to control that flow. What should she even call him? If she were to give him a title, she would call him a joker. Attacks against the walls have decreased. Located steelworker. Checking with Corps owner first. May we go back to guarding steelworker? Kreisha wasn't the only one who noticed the unexpected change in the battlefield. The iron golems, who had been protecting the walls and ready to give their lives in its defense, noticed that the attacks against the walls had lessened. Plus, they noticed Shin Woo on the battlefield, so they requested Kreisha's permission to return to his side. The invaders wouldn't have the energy to attack the walls any longer, so Kreisha unhesitatingly sent the iron golems on their way. Ah, you can go now? Returning to protect steelworker. Destroying structures that get in the way. How dare you, Kuyak! Charging. Killing anything in the way. In the name of steelworker. It was as if they were waiting for that very moment as they immediately turned around. They indiscriminately killed the undead and charged directly towards Shin Woo. The iron golems, which were superb when compared to other level 5 elites, charged side by side. The infighting undead couldn't stop them and were pushed back. It was as if they were erasing the undead with an eraser. Reaching core limit. Self-destructing core. Self-destructing core. Whereas the level 4 bronze golems, which had recklessly charged into the undead force to repel them, reached their limit by the 1s and 2s and executed their final coded command, self-destruct. The surrounding undead were swept away by the explosions and were crushed, falling to the ground in flames. Self-destructing. Kiahiak. They're exploding. Magicians, stop the flames. The bronze golems exploded in various parts of the battlefield, spreading both fire and chaos. It was difficult for the entire corps working together to deal with the explosions, but since this all occurred while they were fighting amongst themselves, the damage was maximized. Ah, is that captain over there? The captain's in danger. Let's save our captain. Let's give peace to the Imperial Army who've lost their reasoning. Ha! Paul Zero. Paul Zero's a good person. I'll help in saving him as well. However, there were guys trying to get in the middle of all the chaos. They were none other than the Pauls, who temporarily left Shin Woo to grow. What's worse, their numbers had doubled. The other Pauls must have been drawn to them and joined up. Let them rest in peace. Paul Zero. Captain's over there. Although they were up against an undead force nearing 10,000 strong, they didn't submit and entered the battle. They emitted their poison, curse, and dark magic, and swung their weapons. The 12 level 4 elites led a force of 40 elite undead, causing a commotion. Rescue the captain! The core commander is alive. Paul 0. Self-destructing core. That guy's not the core commander. He's not. Protecting steelworker. Thus, they just babbled on and gathered in one place, creating an absurd ruckus. Of course, all that commotion was focused around Shin Woo. It really was a mess. Phew, it's chaos. Krasia watched the chaos unfold and thought about whether she would have a chance to intervene, but no matter how she thought about it, things would be settled without her having to get involved. Let's just meditate. In the end, she began to meditate in a safe spot. She decided to gather some mana for now, but she wasn't sure that there would come a time where she needed to use it. The low-rank command skill has become LV10 and evolves into the intermediate level. You can now command several subordinates at once. You can protect your subordinates from mental ailments. All stats have increased by 3. On the other hand, Shin Woo, who was in the very center of that chaos, ordered the undead whilst killing those that approached, while moving hectically. Around that time, his once depleted mana was replenished and he could wield the lightning tooth again, but he didn't do so. Instead, he wielded the transformed staff, the bifurcated snake spine, that he'd gotten off the core commander. Bifurcated snake spine. LV4. Durability. 950, 950. Attack power. 280 to 420. Magic attack power. 400 to 500. Options. Magic plus 40, calculation assistance. Passive skills. Elemental reversal. Absorbs an element and releases the opposite element. The staff likely had a different ability ordinarily, but he couldn't know anymore. Regardless, Shin Woo was quite satisfied with the transformed staff. It was something that could normally only be wielded by magicians, but he could also use it, as one who could wield the elements themselves. The owner of this staff, the core commander Vitas, was originally a mercenary, yet was a genius to be able to use such clean and pure elemental magic. And his staff likely helps in casting elemental magic as well. Knowing that much was enough. It looked different from Vitas, but if the magic he used looked similar, then it would be beneficial in confusing the skeletons. And the elemental magic that Vitas used most when he was still alive was, "I'll freeze you all. Frozen cloud. It's here. The core commander's technique. To think I'd be able to see it once more." Once used, that technique would freeze everything aside from allies. The skeletons who heard Shin Woo's high-pitched scream were elated and yelled. Of course, Shin Woo couldn't use magic like Frozen Cloud. He would just stuff the fire element into the staff and the other fork would spit out ice. Fortunately, he had a superb control over mana, and had caught a few glances of frozen clouds in Vita's memories, so he was able to spread the cold mana into a similar shape. He'd infused quite a bit of mana inside, and the result was truly astounding. Hundreds of undead troops were completely frozen solid. How can this be? Was he truly the core commander all along? That power, that range. How could that be anything but the core commander's strength? It was the result he'd been expecting. The undead in fearful and confused states saw Shin Woo's poor imitation. Though Shin Woo thought it was a poor imitation, his extraordinary aptitude in mana caused his spread of the ice element look like a perfect frozen cloud, and were completely fooled. "I will follow your commands, core commander." "See, core commander. How can this be? How can this be?" Kuik. Those who'd followed him in an obedient state were more sure than ever that he was the core commander, and those who were confused, but not obedient turned obedient after seeing that magic once. Those who were neither confused nor obedient were both shocked and flustered, so they were just attacked and fell. Rather than the magic's power, the magic's symbolism was a more effective large-scale attack. His skill reflected that success as well. The acting skill has become LV12. Your acting ability has become even greater. You feel something supernatural moderately improving your acting ability. Something supernatural, huh? That may actually be the case. Shin Woo grinned and yelled to finish things up. Punish all those who attempted to dirty Sir Metaful's will with their vile machinations. We are the forces under the direct command of the mercenary king. Yeah! The corps commander has spoken. Punish them all. His scream resounded out, covering all of the enemy forces this time. Just because they were in range of his skill didn't mean that they would inevitably be affected by it, but Shin Woo's shout just now was able to bring around half of the undead troops to his side. The moment Shin Woo successfully dirtied Sir Metaful's name through his vile machinations to attain victory. The low-rank shriek of the dead skill has become LV10 and has evolved into the intermediate level. You have continued to train this skill, which is nothing more than a mere scream. By doing so, you can utilize your karma to its maximum potential. You have created a skill whereby any who hear your cry will become dizzy and confused, and you may order them around as you please. The Joker's innate skill, Instigate, has been born. All stats have increased by 10. An innate skill, huh? Hey, everything is going according to plan. Stop lying. He thought it'd be interconnected with the Joker karma, but he didn't think he'd create an innate skill all on his own. Shin Woo muttered, being unable to contain his pride. On the other hand, Jin retorted with an incredibly composed voice. It didn't even take 2 hours before the battle had come to its end, and the skeletons went back to where they belonged. Around the time Shin Woo decided that there weren't any more enemies left remaining and lowered his bifurcated snake spine, a message appeared before him stating that the battle was over. You have defeated a corps under the direct command of the 12 generals. You have acquired 3 permits to God's secret shop. All stats have increased by 10. Proficiency in all combat-related skills has increased. The intermediate combat sense skill has become LV5, and agility has increased by 10. You single-handedly manipulated the core and ultimately destroyed it. Your achievement is unbelievable. You have acquired the title, Core Destroyer. All stats have increased by 20. Whenever you fight against a force of at least 1,000, the effectiveness of all skills increases by 30%. Shin Woo could only laugh upon seeing that his achievement had increased his stats by a total of 80. If he added in God's reward, then his stats had increased by 120. 1. If he told his seniors about this. No. Even if he were to tell Kracia, who was up on that wall, she wouldn't believe him. Core Destroyer, huh? That's my kind of title. You weren't really the one doing the destroying, though. Jin recollected the chaos and destruction Shin Woo had caused and shook his head. Shin Woo clicked his non-existent tongue and Jin ridiculed him. Well, what matters is that we cleaned everything up nicely. That kind of result-oriented thinking is what makes kids with so many dreams feel so wronged. Though it was clean. Because Shin Woo had split the undead force into 2 and made them fight against each other, all of them had died. To be honest, that wasn't completely accurate, but during the chaos, Shin Woo had either taken care of them himself, or had the golems take care of it. Ultimately, he was satisfyingly able to ensure mutual destruction. Completed task. Standing by. Absorbing mana to restore damaged parts. The level 4 bronze golems had sacrificed their cores, so they had been completely annihilated, but the level 5 iron golems were different. They either killed the level 5 undead or began to fight seriously once the undead were afflicted with status ailments, so they were safe. Though their armaments were heavily damaged, they would automatically be restored when they replenished their mana. Of course, it would probably take quite a bit of time, but it was much better than them being completely destroyed. Good work. Rest and replenish your mana. It's an honor. Captain. Shin Woo knocked on the iron golems and complimented them. At that moment, the final participants of the battle approached him. They were the Pauls. Captain. Are you all right? Paul 0. Ah, they were here too. The Pauls were the only factor that he hadn't taken into account. How would he have known that they'd come back at such a good time? Because they had intervened after chaos had reigned over the battlefield for some time, they were able to participate without any casualties. Honestly, one could call that a miracle. Good work all of you. I see new faces joining us. Shin Woo smiled broadly and faced them. He'd been thinking about how he'd dispose of the relatively useless level 3 bones strewn across the battlefield anyway. It's been a long time, Paul Zero. I'm surprised you took these guys as your subordinates, but seeing you do all this, it makes sense somewhat. Captain, you're really amazing. Enough with the flattery. You all, scatter and collect all the loot and bones. I have something I can do for you as well. Perhaps? It's an honor, Captain. We have bones we gathered from our own hunting, so please look after us. All right. I'll let you inherit the wills within those bones. Now get a move on. Jin's goblin fire swayed, seeing Shin Woo use the pawls whenever he wished, but Shin Woo completely ignored him. The pawls moved enthusiastically, and it wasn't long before they cleaned up the battlefield of all the loot. Captain, we're back. Here's the Parium. This is all your karma, so please don't hesitate and take it. All right. Then I'll take it. Good work all of you. You have acquired 17,291,080 Parium. Shin Woo accepted the Parium the pawls had brought him all at once and couldn't believe his eyes. It wasn't 170,000 or 1.7 million, but 17 million? He'd only received 2 million Parium from cleaning out the entire city. What's worse, Shin Woo had separated the loot from the level 5 Elder Knights that Kraisha had killed with her Grand Ice Spear, yet this was how high the total was. It wasn't calculated wrong, was it? It doesn't seem like it? However, when he thought about it calmly, this seemed only natural. The undead in the city had been level 2, and the undead in the core were level 3. No matter how little a level 3 undead drops, they would drop at least 1,000 Parium. 10,000 of those would drop 10 million Parium. And if he added the level 4 and level 5 undead to that, it seemed only natural that he'd accumulate this much. Ha, ha ha. I think I could buy a level 7 elite bone with this much. I knew you'd say something like that. Shin Woo suddenly realized how impressive it was that he'd crushed the undead core. However, the truly impressive part was starting now. Captain, we'll leave the weapons over here. We'll divide the bones based on level and place them over here, Captain. Most of the undead core carried weapons. There were several exceptional weapons that were at least level 2. There were a few level 3 weapons that were good enough that Shin Woo wanted them. However, the bones were more exceptional than the weapons. There were too many level 3 bones, so he couldn't count them all, while there were around 400 level 4 bones and 78 level 5 bones. Was there only one level 6 bone? The one from the core commander that I've already absorbed. At the beginning, I thought there would be dozens of level 6 core commanders, and even some level 7 undead as well, since it's under the direct command of the 12 generals. Shin Woo looked upon the separately divided heaps of bones and suddenly had that doubt. Irema Steelworker, who was one of the 12 generals, was level 8, and his subordinate, Guillotine, was level 7. But Metaful's core commander was only level 6, even though Metaful was one of the 12 generals? They were both generals, but there's a huge difference in the strength of their forces. Even so, is it because they're mercenaries? Or did this core only consist of the leftover troops? If not that either, then maybe the golems are a special case and are especially powerful. You're seriously saying something completely different from what you were talking about a second ago. If not, then perhaps the core commander might have been powerful for a level 6. That was probably it. Shin Woo had reinforced the Drake Horn Lance significantly through Rule of Bone, assimilated with Jin, and used Shadow Sprint. Through all of that, he drew out his maximum power, charged, and lunged at the Ghoul Wizard. Even though the ambush was perfect in so many ways, the Ghoul Wizard was able to cancel out his attack. That was proof of the considerable stat differential between them. If Shin Woo hadn't launched the Drake Horn Lance immediately through Rule of Bone, he probably would have died right there. When he thought back, it was a dizzying moment. If I had been able to use Avenger, the fight would have been a lot easier. But we got him, didn't we? It wasn't perfect, though. I thought this before, but the stat differential was too severe. Because he'd advanced in various ways from this battle, he came close to a total of 2,000 stats, but 2,000 stats was still very low for a level 5. He felt as though increasing his stats by just 10 counted as growth, but if he were up against an opponent with stats higher than his by 2,000, 3,000 or even more. When he thought about the fact that he needed 3,200 stats at least to reach level 6, it wouldn't be surprising for his enemy to possess stats doubling or even tripling his own. Moreover, there's a disparity between the effectiveness of their status as well. Besides, we even ambushed him, a magician who possesses a frail body, without giving him the opportunity to cast any magic, yet it wasn't perfect. I had too much faith in Rule of Bone and Bursting Thunder. I should really try harder from now on. Yeah, let's play it safe from now on. Please. But all we need to do is not fight them face to face, so don't worry so much. That just makes me worry more. Shin Woo listened to Jin, grinned, and raised his head. The Pauls, who stood side by side in a line, gazed at him with bright eyes. He was already well aware of what they wanted. Then, shall we begin? Step forward, those who wish to inherit the wills of the Empire's soldiers and knights. We heard from Paul 47. I would like to inherit their wills and dreams as well. Good. You seem determined. Then we'll start with you, Paul 39. Yes. Honestly, the level 3 bones didn't really have any value to Shin Woo or Jin. However, it was different for the Pauls. The level 3 bones would reinforce the Pauls, and even the level 4 Pauls could increase their stats by absorbing several level 3 bones. Shin Woo intended to turn all 43 of the Pauls here into level 4s, so he decided to focus bone reinforcement on the Pauls who hadn't reached level 4 yet. Ah, so that's how it was. I'm being filled with their wills, their strength, and their memories. It's overflowing. Thank you, Paul 0. No, Captain. His bone reinforcement was at a level where he could continuously reinforce the other Pauls with dozens of bones in only 1 second. Light radiated in various places, and Shin Woo managed to awaken the Pauls. I'll follow you, Captain. I'm the last one, Captain. Ah, so you were doing that again. Around that time, Kraisha had finished her meditation and came down from the wall. All she'd done in the battle was manifest and throw a grand ice spear, but it had a huge effect on the battlefield, so she received a lot of rewards from her achievement following the battle. She was busy with her magic, so it had taken quite a bit of time for her to get down and accept all of her rewards. Kraisha, just stay put and watch. Ah, and that's your share of the loot. I'll buy the level 5 night bones. You'll sell them cheap, right? Then that'll clear my debt of gratitude to you, as you let me stay with you longer. Okay. Shin Woo smoothly finished the deal with Kraisha and went back to reinforcing. The level 3 Pauls, who originally had high specs and were close to level 4, were quickly reborn as level 4 Doom Factors. On the other hand, the Pauls who had relatively low specs in comparison were indiscriminately reinforced until they couldn't take the barrage of bone reinforcement and leveled up. Obviously, Shin Woo got something out of it too. The bone reinforcement skill has become LV7. When you use bone reinforcement on someone else, the effect is increased and you can now absorb a large portion of it as well. Was it because of the Paul's strong will to inherit their fellow comrades' wills? It only took 3 hours before he was finished reinforcing them. He had used all of the level 3 bones, as well as the bones they had brought with them from hunting, and had managed to transform all of the 43 Pauls into level 4 elites. However, that wasn't the end of his bone reinforcement. After he separated the items that seemed special or increased stats, he suddenly reinforced the remaining bone weapons with each other to create an even more powerful weapon. Bone reinforcement has failed. Failed. Succeeded. Failed. 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 Succeeded. The LV2 Bone Thorn Spear has evolved into the LV3 Black Canine Tooth Spear. Nice. I've never seen this shape and material before. Plus, it increases stats too. Pass. You're really persistent, you know that. That's how he used all the weapons he'd collected from the battlefield, and ultimately, he created 50 level 3 weapons. There had originally been about 20 guys wielding level 3 weapons, so he had 70 level 3 weapons in total. To top it off, he had the level 4 weapon, the bifurcated snake spine. Then are you going to fuse those together now too to create an even better weapon? I'm not crazy. Why would I do something so wasteful? Then are you going to give them to the Pauls? That's what I'll do if I have any left remaining. Before, Shin Woo liked absorbing bones more than bone equipment to strengthen himself. However, after he acquired the weapon Trickster's Bone and learned the bone armory skill, that thought changed a bit. He thought he needed to make use of all the weapons that he could. Because of that, this was his decision. Now let's fill up the storehouse, Bone Armory. Chapter 19. Clean up. Bone Armory's potential was as limitless as Rule of Bone. Even if the level of the equipment was low, he could use the information from other pieces of equipment to reinforce the low-leveled ones. Like what happened to his level 3 armor, which leveled up due to the acid skull helm. In other words, the diversity of the equipment is as important as the level. Since I can combine that countless information and create something that fits the situation. You're an alchemist. As I thought, the one thing my bone skills have in common is that they're all fraudulent skills. Most level 3 equipment had stats attached to them. Of course, absorbing bone equipment was like absorbing bones. The more bone equipment of a similar type he absorbed, the less effective it would be. However, that wasn't the case right now. He watched the reborn level 4 Pauls examine themselves and decided to visit the buffet. Start his own bone reinforcement. First up was the bone staff, the bifurcated snake spine which helped him impersonate the corps commander. Kreisha's eyes lit up at the sight, but Shin Woo calmly ignored her. In any case, she wasn't the one who took him down. If she asked for it as part of her share, then he was prepared to pay for it with Perium. Since he wasn't a thief. Then, bone reinforcement. Absorbing the LV4 bifurcated snake spine. Magic has increased by 40. The absorbed bifurcated snake spine is affected by the other equipment in the bone armory and is buffed. The information of the other absorbed equipment in the bone armory was applied, and the absorbed information was analyzed and buffed, transforming into a completely new piece of equipment. Shin Woo didn't wait for the result and absorbed the next piece of equipment. This time, it was a level 3 helmet that completely covered his face. Absorbing the level 3 full skull helm. Health has increased by 7. The absorbed full skull helm reinforces the acid skull helm's information. You can now summon the acid full skull helm. This time, there wasn't any need for analysis, it immediately transformed. Since the information update only applied to a specific piece of equipment. Moreover, Shin Woo was even more pleased, as it was the outcome he'd expected. The options weren't updated, but he was now able to summon a helmet that better covered his face and its defense naturally increased. Just this made it worth it to absorb the helmet. Is level 3 equipment normally this common? If undead core of at least 10,000 strong are common in this world, then yeah, they're common. Bone reinforcement. Bone reinforcement. Shin Woo ignored Kreisha and Jin, who were watching from behind and talking nonsense, and continued to absorb the weapons. While some equipment only raised his stats by like 1 health and 1 strength, which was nothing to write home about, other equipment raised his stats by so much that it made him wonder. Is this really okay for a level 3 weapon, as the stat gain was shocking? Bone reinforcement. This. Especially if there was a piece of equipment that was already stored within the bone armory that shared a great affinity with the absorbed equipment. In cases like that, the item would change dramatically, becoming greater than he expected. A gold mine amongst these was absorbing the LV3 spine whip. Strength and agility have increased by 7. The absorbed spine whip is affected by the other equipment in the bone armory and is buffed. You can now summon the LV5 bifurcated spine whip. To think the information of level 3 equipment and level 4 equipment could combine to make a level 5 weapon. You're really rubbing salt in the wound. Since I can't even equip armor, I'm not jealous one bit. Show me. Show me the level 5 equipment. While Jin seemed uninterested, Kreisha's eyes brightened like a little kid. Rather than the effect of the item, she was likely interested in how the two's information mingled together to create a new piece of equipment. Fine. Then. Ooh. Shin Woo summoned the bifurcated spine whip for Kracia. The level 3 spine whip possessed a flat grip, and above it was a 2-meter-long, unpleasant human-shaped spine. On the other hand, the level 5 bifurcated spine whip had a different grip feel, and the menacing spine split into two, stretching up to 3 meters with thorns protruding from it. The overall feel was completely different. As I thought, a level 5 weapon looks a lot different. It's really pretty. Perhaps Kracia's feeling really disappointed right now. Kracia's eyes brightened even more when she looked upon the bifurcated spine whip, causing Shin Woo to inwardly mutter. You have 2 level 5 weapons stored inside of the Bone Armory. The Bone Armory skill has become LV4. Health and magic have increased by 10. The number of equipment you can summon and maintain at one time has increased to 4. Yes. Bone Armory had leveled up, so he could finally summon upper and lower body armor, a helmet, and a weapon as well. He'd suffered for quite a long time since first attaining the Bone Armory skill, but now he finally recovered his fully armed state. However, this wasn't the end of his happiness. He had alternated between absorbing weapons and armor, and while the pieces of equipment's information he'd lacked was slowly being filled, he apparently fulfilled some sort of condition he wasn't aware of, and this message appeared. You have completed the LV4 Acid Bone Full Armor. You can summon the pieces separately, or you can summon it as a single, complete set. Wait, does this mean? The moment that message appeared, Shin Woo de-equipped all his equipment, even while he was in disbelief. Jin was shocked, and whether or not he yelled wasn't his concern. He immediately summoned the armor again. Seeing that, Jin tilted his head and spoke. Maybe it's because the equipment information was updated, but it feels like the armor has a greater sense of unity than before. Your high agility makes you quite sharp. You're right. This has been unified. The Acid Bone Full Armor was one set. In other words, the 3 pieces, the helm, the upper body armor, and the lower body armor, were considered one piece and could be summoned as a whole. Naturally, the mana consumption was reduced, and the armor's joints became tougher. To think he would achieve a unification here, when he couldn't do so in his own homeland. Shin Woo was deeply moved and examined his body. He'd absorbed dozens of equipment, and because the strong points of the armor and weapons were applied, his armor was both refined and functional. Above all, there weren't any chinks in the armor, and it covered his entire body. From an outsider's perspective, one wouldn't be able to tell whether he was living or undead. I can mimic a living person's mana, so if I'm in a jam, I'll act while wearing the armor, and when I take it off, I'll disguise myself. It's perfect. Of course, if the situation necessitated it and he needed to play a different role, he would need to change the appearance of his armor a bit, but because he'd absorbed so much equipment, he wasn't worried about changing his armor. Nice. As I thought, it was an excellent decision. After that, Shin Woo, who had become more flexible, absorbed a few more pieces of equipment. Around the time no more meaningful changes occurred, he stopped his outstretched hand. Seeing Kracia's eyes brighten up, Shin Woo firmly shook his head and explained. Since they were similar types of soldiers, the weapons they use don't have much variety to them. I think this is enough. Any more is meaningless. He'd absorbed around 40 pieces of equipment and obtained at least 200 stats. That meant his stats increased by 160 if he excluded the 40 magic he'd gained from the bifurcated snake spine. In many ways, the suddenly appearing undead core had helped Shin Woo. It was to the point that Shin Woo wanted to kowtow before one of the 12 generals, the mercenary king Metafel. Then what about what's left? You guys. Whoever doesn't have a level 3 weapon, come over here and pick whatever you like. Captain. Thank you, Captain. Shin Woo was offering them the leftover weapons and acted as though he was doing this out of the generosity of his heart, but even so, the Pauls couldn't help but be touched by his actions. Honestly, he was only doing this because they defeated a force of 10,000. Normally, level 3 equipment wasn't easy to find. If one wanted to buy this kind of equipment from the secret shop, they would need to possess considerable funds. If it's that expensive, why don't you just sell it at the shop? I thought about that too, but the sales charge pisses me off. In terms of cost performance, giving these guys the equipment to increase their strength is probably better. Originally, Shin Woo hadn't had any consideration for the Pauls. However, as he realized that he could make them into his subordinates, as well as use bone reinforcement on them to transform them into level 4 elites, he began to have a small hope for them. If the numbers kept increasing like this and he increased their levels, he might be able to create an independent force. The more variables there are, the better. Investing this much into them doesn't feel like a waste. You're really amazing. Lately, I've been thinking that a bit too. Shin Woo replied honestly and went to the last thing on his agenda. Naturally, it was to reinforce himself and Jin with the level 4 and 5 bones. That wouldn't work on me, right? Come back when you're only bones. No thanks. If he were to exclude Vitas, the core commander, the other remaining bones didn't really have any exceptional options. The level 4 knights and magicians' memories and experiences was useful, and the stats and skill proficiency from the level 5 elder knights and wizards was tremendous. The intermediate bursting thunder skill has become LV2. Strength and magic have increased by 5. You can better incorporate lighting into your weapon and, using that lightning, you may swing your weapon faster. The intermediate shadow sprint skill has become LV2. Agility has increased by 10. Your running form looks a bit more like a shadow. Shin Woo's total stats were now 2,272 due to the stat gain from the bones, as well as the experiences that further improved his skills. He needed 928 more stats to reach level 6. Though he'd obtained hundreds of stats from one battle, Shin Woo wasn't satisfied. That's because he knew that he still had a long way to go. Don't be so dramatic. You didn't even absorb half of what I did. In order for Jin to more effectively absorb the undead's experiences and memories, he twitched on the floor while Shin Woo calmly sorted through the experiences and memories. This was his time to organize the combat and magic techniques he'd acquire from the knights and magicians. It was simultaneously a time for him to organize his information on one of the 12 generals, the mercenary King Metafel, as well as the corps he led using the corps commander Vita's memories. Their past, and if it's possible, their present as well. Shin Woo calmly organized the memories, and at some point, he opened his eyes wide open. His waning goblin fire looked as though it had suddenly burst out. What's wrong? Seeing that, Kraisha was slightly scared and asked. Shin Woo replied extremely calmly. It's nothing. Liar. Yeah, I'm lying. Kraisha pouted at Shin Woo's extremely confident attitude, while Shin Woo just grinned. Then, he spoke amicably. Let's do our best for the remainder of our contract. He spoke as if he had drawn the line there, and he would never tell her no matter what. Realizing that, Kraisha felt the urge to increase the contract duration, but unfortunately, she had no way of doing so, so she ultimately disappointedly nodded her head. All beings possess a magic inherent to them, and the properties of this magic gradually change as one accumulates karma and grows. For example, if one were to train in ice magic, their magic would become colder, and if one used magic to reinforce their sword and body, their magic would become heavier. However, Shin Woo's magic was a bit different. Since he had such a variety of abilities and had used these abilities so diligently, his magic didn't have a chance to go in a specific direction. No, that's what he had thought in the beginning, but that wasn't actually the case. His magic was. That means the innate quality of my magic can change case by case. Yeah, sure. Why not? Kraisha couldn't understand how Shin Woo's magic could so freely change, and made her hair even messier than before, but Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders. In the process of creating a golem's mana, he had a small realization. His mana had become a part of him, and was something he could fabricate like his speech, his expression, or his clothes. He could say that even his mana had become an extension of the acting and disguise skills. If I attempted to do it consciously, the magic loss would be too severe. But you can control it freely. Yeah, that's the characteristic of your mana. The quality of having an indeterminate form that can change into anything. In other words, my magic is like Shido. 1. Considering the fact that Shin Woo could control 3 of the elements themselves, Shin Woo's magic already possessed limitless potential. Kracia recognized that she couldn't do what Shin Woo could do before, yet even so, she couldn't stop her research. What she said next was something that would be helpful to Shin Woo as well. My catalyst magic was an attempt to replicate your ability to change mana. Since it's hard for me to change my own mana, I decided to change the naturally existing mana instead. That sounds even harder. No, it's not hard. Because a lot of techniques already exist that induce the naturally occurring mana to change. But in the process of analyzing your mana, I was able to create a new mana pattern that has better mana cohesion and efficiency. I understand it all, so keep going. Shin Woo decided to memorize everything Kracia was saying and insisted that she continue. She sighed and continued. If the focus of your ability is to change your own mana, then mine is to change external mana. And my way of barely doing so is through a catalyst. So what I'm saying is... She paused and raised a small orb. It was the growing artifact she got from God, the Orb of Eternal Ice. As expected, that everlasting ice crystal was the catalyst of her magic. I was narrowly able to induce the magic to change. It hasn't been long since this child was born, so its course hasn't completely been set yet, so, in a lot of ways, I was lucky. Since it's now easy to impart a will upon an item. So are you trying to brag about your artifact to me or what? More importantly, don't you feel something from looking at this orb? It's big and beautiful. Liar. Shin Woo gazed at the orb piercingly, the orb being daintier than Kracia's white hand. Kracia pushed the orb forward, as if she were okay with him holding it and gazing at it, but Shin Woo shook his head. If I touch it, it might change into bone. What a terrifying ability. Shin Woo examined the orb more carefully than before. He felt a vortex of ice-cold mana within that was expanding even now. He'd used ice mana a bit before through the elemental reversal ability. He expected that he'd be able to completely master that element as well, if he practiced just a bit more with the bifurcated snake spine. But that's not the issue right now. The pattern that caused the mana to remain inside the orb was extremely unique. That was probably why Kracia had told him to take a look. Looking at it once wouldn't be enough for him to memorize the pattern. It wasn't that easy. This whole thing was a magic circle. If the difficulty of creating a golem seal was increased by 100x, then this is what it would look like. Ultimately, this technique just allows me, who's proficient in ice magic, to use the ice artifact, Eternal Ice, to change the surrounding mana into ice, but you should be able to learn something from this. Yeah, alright. I completely understand it. Like always, Shin Woo maintained his poker face and spoke calmly, but Kracia knew that Shin Woo had no idea how it worked. Should we increase the duration of the contract? No. If all I need to do is memorize it, I can do it within a day. TCH. The moment her plan to continue accompanying Shin Woo and acquire some magic inspiration from him failed. That's right. This was the last day of their contract. Starting tomorrow, they had to go their own separate ways. Kracia inwardly spewed out curses at Shin Woo as he failed to acknowledge her passion for magic, but outwardly, she endured with a slight pout. Being angry would be a waste of precious time. In any case, I'll continue explaining. I was barely able to manifest the magic through a catalyst, but you're capable to transforming your mana into anything. Right? I can't transform it into anything. Just what I know. In other words, if you figure out how this catalyst works, you should be able to turn your body itself into a huge catalyst. At least, that's what I've been thinking. Time froze at that very moment. As expected of a woman who handles ice magic, her skills were peerless. You know, you're saying something really frightening right now. It's not that frightening compared to your latent potential. Shin Woo dwelled over what Kracia had said so nonchalantly, and his body slightly quivered. I can become a catalyst, huh? If that happened, he'd be able to control the mana in the entire area however he pleased. Especially because Shin Woo could freely change his mana. If he could actually change his mana into a catalyst, the products that came about from it would be limitless. I can't even imagine it. It'll be possible for you someday. As long as I help you. Why are you going so far to help me? Since I want to see it happen. Kraisha replied unhesitatingly, her eyes surging with a delicate enthusiasm. It might have been unbecoming for an ice magician, but Shin Woo thought that this pure passion of hers may have been the driving force behind her growth to level 6. Even so, I'm not extending the duration of the contract. Why not? Kraisha yelled, genuinely frustrated, and Shin Woo just grinned and replied. What's wrong with you? It's not like we're never going to see each other again. We can just form another team when we meet again. I'll probably be stronger than you by then. You seem plenty strong now. I'm not interested in strength that can only be used in a self-contained situation. If he didn't have the strength to overcome an enemy face to face, he would ultimately have to rely on unconventional tactics each and every time. Shin Woo was confident in his unconventional tactics, but he also believed that he couldn't rely on such shallow methods forever. Rule of Bone, Bursting Thunder, Mana Bone. I can become strong. As long as I strive for it. Shin Woo forcefully balled his hands into fists and suddenly resolved himself. He didn't show what he was feeling very often, but before he knew it, he'd begun to trust Kraisha more and had done so unconsciously. Seeing that, Kraisha felt that they fundamentally weren't very different and was very slightly relieved. Meanwhile, Jin had been ignoring everything else and was training his steel body. The intermediate Mana Bone skill has become LV4. Magic has increased by 10. Any action concerning the use of mana is buffed. Before it became dark, Shin Woo successfully memorized the Eternal Ice's structure, and that was enough to cause his Mana Bone skill to level up. That meant the knowledge she'd passed on to him was something extraordinary. Kraisha also gained something from this. Shin Woo lent her his bifurcated snake spine, and demonstrated how he changed the elements. That deepened her understanding of her own element and naturally caused her catalyst magic to develop further as well. If she were still on her home planet, the two of them wouldn't be able to separate, as they had shared so much of their information and experiences with each other. They would be together until death. It's unfortunate that we can't. Haha, you're funny, Mr. Feynman, too, but you can't do that here. I'll contact you when I can private chat. All right. About what I requested. You can do it, right? Of course. Kraisha firmly nodded her head, holding the limited order bone core that Shin Woo had remodeled. She wasn't finished studying the core, but it was still Shin Woo's, so she was about to tearfully return it to him. However, Shin Woo said it was fine if she kept it and instead asked her to fulfill a request of his. If you find any golems on the way, don't destroy them. Instead, command them to go to a specific place. Originally, others couldn't command golems with the core aside from Shin Woo unless they were temporary commands. Shin Woo had drastically increased the functions of the core and in the end, succeeded in infusing the core with the Steelworker Command Authority. His goal was to maintain an army of golems. If he were able to gather golems, they would become a reliable fighting force later on. Of course, Shin Woo also planned on giving any golem he encountered the same command. Ah, thanks for the grapes. I feel like I could just eat grapes until I die. Make sure you get enough nutrients. The two extended their arms and shook hands. A warm heat transmitted to his bare bone hand. It felt like his completely empty heart was being warmed as well. It felt qualitatively different from when he had shook hands with Aryan. For a moment, Shin Woo felt a bit regretful as he might have been able to form a relationship like this with Aryan as well, but Shin Woo soon erased that thought from his mind. Since it was my choice. He didn't just have to part ways with Kraisha. Shin Woo had to part ways with the 43 Pauls, who were reborn as level 4 elites. We are truly in your debt, Captain. I'd like to always serve by your side, but it's not yet time. I told you last time, but I still have a lot I need to do. Captain. However, I promise you. There will be a time when we fight together. There'll be a day when the curse is lifted from the underground empire. We'll do our utmost to prepare for that day. We won't trouble you, Captain." Originally, they trusted and obeyed Shin Woo because of his connections to both Anti-Skull and General Seagal. However, once they became his subordinates, they didn't really think about General Seagal. He was just someone they once pledged their loyalty to. Their lives already belonged to Shin Woo. "I'll give you the golems. I'll save those who are wandering through the darkness like you and send them to you." "I understand, Captain." If his final goodbye with Kracia felt like a story of youth, then his final goodbye with the Pauls felt like a war story. Kracia, who hadn't left yet, saw that and was deeply touched. That was the icing on the cake. "We'll return no matter what, Captain. No matter what. See you later. Don't die. Yeah, don't die." The Pauls, accompanied by the 3 iron golems which had reduced their size, and Kracia, who wielded the orb and core in each hand, went in separate directions. Shin Woo sent them off with a smile. "They're completely gone now, right?" "Yeah." And when they couldn't see them anymore, Shin Woo secretly lowered his hand. He wasn't even doing something that made him feel small, but pointlessly felt as though he couldn't hold his head up high. "Good. Then, shall we go?" "Go by yourself. You have nothing to be afraid of." Shin Woo smiled bitterly at Jin's firm reply. He now had 4 permits to God's secret shop due to the battle. He used one of them and entered God's secret shop. "Guten Abend." 1. "Oh my, you came by yourself?" "Hello, Plane." The secret shop's owner, Plane, always greeted him with the same expression, whether it was when he was level 1 and didn't know anything, or now, when he was level 5 and realized that the events in the Underground Empire aren't progressing as simply as a retro game scenario. "Is the hot cocoa good? Would you like some?" "Ah, I forgot you can't drink it." Moreover, she would always be eating something with a blissful expression whenever he entered the shop. She never failed to get under his skin. The red-haired beauty set down her cup of hot cocoa, which had been pressed to her lips, and laughed while Shin Woo just grit his teeth. Then, she spoke a bit more seriously than before. "Last time I said I didn't think you'd be able to gather all that perium, but how about it? Did you gather 1.3 million perium?" "Of course I did. Was it time to fight back now?" Shin Woo smiled faintly, and Plane was sure that he made a lot of money. "The time between visits was a bit long this time." "Ah, that's because I went to God's garden in between, so I needed some time to gather some more permits." "You visited God." As expected, it seemed as though Plane's information was indeed limited. Upon saying that he went to God's garden, Plane started bombarding him with questions, and Shin Woo just replied adequately. When he told her about how he'd asked God for a quest to kill the undead heroes, she laughed uproariously. "You made a choice like a hero who's been underground for dozens of years. I'm not actually sure if this was a good idea or not, but you're probably already aware of this, but there's a limit to the karma she can bestow upon a human. A piece of her grace, the God's garden, which can only be reached by gathering permits, is also the same. That's the reason she cannot give you such a tremendous blessing, no matter how much she might want to. If God could unlimitedly bestow her power to others, the curse would already be gone. The reason Shin Woo could receive a greater blessing than the other heroes was because he traded his life for it. At the time, he couldn't understand, but now he understood it well, as if it were only natural. That's true. What if she doesn't personally bestow that grace, but does so indirectly? And what if that blessing can only be bestowed upon you by using your own karma as a foundation? Naturally, the limitation widens significantly. That's the reason you were able to obtain the information regarding the scattered undead heroes in the Empire. Shin Woo had made that request because he had a rough idea of what would happen. He thought it'd be much more profitable to get the quest rather than an item, but in terms of results, he'd hit the mark. It was fine if he accepted it like that. Plane, do you know about Ethan Cruz? Ah, if you're asking specifically about him, does that mean you know? Shin Woo wordlessly nodded his head, and Plane looked like she was at a loss. You've realized something that the other heroes have yet to realize. But regarding that person, I can only tell you to avoid him. I don't trade with him because I like him. Please understand that I can't carelessly pass on his information so long as he remains a hero. Is it really okay for a hero to kill another hero? It's not really forbidden. Normally, heroes can't absorb other heroes' strength by killing them, and even if they gain karma from killing them, they'll also accumulate bad karma, so there's no reason to do something so foolish. Ethan Cruz must possess an authority that makes that bad karma beneficial to him, or maybe he has a skill that does it. That's probably enough information. Plane looked really troubled, so Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders and decided to go on to the main topic. Anyway, I have some goods that I'd like to sell this time around. Goods you'd like to sell? Ah, is it food? Plane knew that Shin Woo possessed an ability that allowed him to utilize most items, so she quickly came to a conclusion and sported a deep smile. You must have acquired it in a dungeon, so it should be fruit or vegetables. No, is it meat? Both are fine. Because every other hero wants food, you'll be paid handsomely. How about alcohol? Alcohol? Plane's eyes momentarily shimmered like the stars on the ceiling of a planetarium. At least, that's what it felt like to him. Alcohol is sold at an expensive price above ground as well. The unit price is different, the unit price. Please take it out. How many bottles do you have? You sell goods above ground as well? Oh my! I have to make a living too, so I can't just trade with heroes, who only bring gloomy things, right? You haven't taken the alcohol out yet? What type is it? Whiskey? Rice wine? Vodka? Ah, but wine would be the best. Was it the mood? It felt like Plane would drink the alcohol whenever he took out a bottle. Shin Woo slightly opened his inventory and took out a bottle of wine. Plane's eyes definitely shimmered like stars this time. It's wine. Please take a look. This is from Kerr Century. There was still a Kerr Century remaining underground? Ah, yes. If he told her there was an entire winery still there, it felt like she would take everything he had. Around now, Shin Woo realized that the goods he'd brought weren't ordinary. Ah, they're not vintage. But this much wine. All right. It has a premium, so I can give you 20,000 perium for it. That's not all I have. I have other types, so please take a look at them. Others. 381. This is a great vintage. This is vintage as well. This isn't. Ah, but it's still great wine. Since only novices are so concerned over the vintage. I have no idea what you're talking about, so do as you please. Before he entered the secret shop, it felt like he was going to a wholesale dealer to sell his wine, but now it felt like he was having a sommelier examine his wine. Shin Woo took out all the wine he had, which was a bit less than 50 bottles, and she looked distressed, with the most serious expression he'd ever seen from her. Then, she opened her mouth. I'll buy them all for a total of 1.5 million perium. That's quite a lot. They're that valuable. Wine requires countless people's effort and finances to create, so the karmic value is considerable. That's especially true for older wine. Finally, there's a saying that Kerr Century's wine is so delicious that you have to bow before drinking it, even though it's the cheapest. I see. Then I'll sell them at that price. Wait a sec. Shin Woo spoke nonchalantly, and Plane's eyes glittered. Her red hair surged up, as if it were aflame. Them? Do you have others as well? Yes, I have the biggest one left. The biggest one. This time, Plane's hands wriggled unpleasantly. She showed him so many expressions that he'd never seen from her before with just one word, alcohol, and obediently took out the alcohol like she wanted. Well, 1 barrel for now. What is? Huh? Plane looked vacantly at him as if saying, you said you'd bring out alcohol, but what's with this wooden barrel? But soon realized what it was. I thought you'd brought way too much, but you didn't. I took everything that was in a winery. I have others besides this one. Kya. Until now, Plane had only moved her hands from behind the stall and hadn't even bobbed her head up and down, yet for the first time, she abruptly stood up from her seat. Shin Woo watched her and his goblin fire gently swayed. Are you planning to drink it all yourself? I can't do that. I can't. Though it would be easy. Even while speaking, she instinctually extended her hand towards him. Since he knew what she wanted, Shin Woo helped her touch the wooden barrel, and the next moment her hand slightly shook. She had read the information on the wooden barrel. Cur Century, 395. Plain, who'd ascertained when the wine was made, gently closed her eyes. Her throat slightly wriggled. The sight of her trying to restrain her surging emotions actually shocked Shin Woo. He could understand why she felt so conflicted without even asking her. She didn't look it, but she was someone connected with the fall of the underground empire. I suppose. Even then, they were still fermenting alcohol. Plain, who had struggled to open her eyes, strained herself to say that. He acted like he hadn't heard her. However, she continued. Well, I suppose that's what happened. That's when everything was overflowing with life. They had never failed with magic before. The harvest was bountiful. Can I call you Granny? Customer, do you want me to hit you? Do you want to get hit? He teased her in an attempt to cheer her up, but he ended up pissing her off. However, it wasn't like it was completely ineffective, as she soon left her sentimental thoughts behind. She fake coughed with an ahem and returned to her normal calm voice. Mr. Shin Woo, please act as if you didn't hear what I just said. Ah, and please remember that I'm 17. Yes, I understand. Getting involved with a merchant who calls herself 17 when she's not can't lead to anything good. Shin Woo suddenly felt relieved that he was a skeleton, and Plain made an offer. The wine's own value, as well as its historical value. That's excluding the rating as well. This alcohol is way too valuable to exchange for perium, so let's trade instead. I'll trade for them with whatever you wish for, Mr. Shin Woo. That's good. I want bones. I knew you would say that. Despite the fact that the barrels had significantly lower value as they weren't bottled, each barrel stored several dozens of liters of wine, so each wooden barrel was valued at least 1 million perium. He'd cleared out an entire winery, so he would be able to easily buy a level 6 elite bone. Then I'll take them out. How many do you have? I'd like to get a rough estimate, so I can give you suitable products in exchange. Plain, who sported a joyous expression and had been rummaging under the counter, saw Shin Woo take barrel after barrel out of his inventory, and her face gradually stiffened. Wait a sec. How many barrels do you have? I think there were about 100 barrels. I counted about 2,000 liters. 2,000 liters. Then that means... Eek! She didn't think just one hero would be able to sell so much that she would go eek. Plain just let that moment pass. Shin Woo was flustered, and Plain quickly straightened herself out, stood up, and made an offer. Mr. Shin Woo, there's an item that was stored many years ago in this shop, and none like it have ever entered the shop again. Would you like to see it? I told you I wanted some bones. Yes, it's a bone. It's also the best bone we have. Could it be? Shin Woo thought, and the moment his eyes lit up. Plain nodded her head as if his assumption was correct and spoke. It's the only bone in this shop that costs 30 million. It's the level 7 elite, the giant Fenno's bone. It took quite a long time. While Shin Woo was visiting the shop, Kahebi remained quiet. Jin must have been really bored being stuck in the city alone as he welcomed him back. Shin Woo grinned and replied, "That's because we were setting the price of each and every barrel of wine." So, how was it? Jin asked whether the wine was sold at a high price or not, and Shin Woo simply replied like this. I took all of the level 6 elite bones they had. It seems like there aren't a lot of people killing level 6 elites. Yet there's still a barrel of wine left over. Why didn't you just sell it and buy a weapon or something? The only thing Shin Woo didn't sell was the first wooden barrel he'd discovered in the winery containing the Cur Century Delocus 395, 52L. While he could obtain all the bones without selling it, there was another important reason to it. I'll probably use it later somewhere. It doesn't seem like we'd have a use for it, but... No, Do what you want. He was probably being considerate, but it didn't really work. Shin Woo chuckled and changed the subject. Then shall we start reinforcing? Oh no. Don't. Shin Woo possessed 120 million perium in total. This came from selling all the wine that he'd gotten from the winery, as well as from the battle that ensued with the core. With that 120 million perium, he brought something that cost as much as 30 million. That was a level 7 elite, Phenno's bone. And with the remaining 90 million he bought all of the level 6 elite bones, which ranged from 1.5 million perium to 7 million. As a result, there were 24 bones on the ground emitting light, 23 level 6 bones, and 1 level 7 bone. Life is all about luck. It's scary just looking at it all. What they'd acquired from selling all of the wine trumped everything that Shin Woo and Jin had acquired thus far through their blood, sweat, and tears. However, Shin Woo knew that life was like that. What was most important in life? It was luck. Shin Woo was just happy that luck was on his side right now. Right now, the most important stat for you is magic. So let's put all the bones that increase magic in your direction. Level 6 bones. The level 5 bones hurt like crazy, so do you really think that I can absorb the level 6s? I'll help you. You should be able to endure it. In the end, Jin resolved himself. He couldn't back off for his own sake, and he couldn't back off for Shin Woo's sake as well, since he wanted to be more helpful to Shin Woo. Shin Woo realized that Jin was all ready, so he raised one level 6 bone in his hand. It was a bone which was radiating an extremely deep blue. It was quite obvious that in terms of pure magic, the original owner of this bone was greater than Vita's, who led a core of 10,000 strong. We're connected, so it shouldn't be that hard. Who? I got it. Let's go. All right. As the level of his bone reinforcement increased, he was able to share almost all the memories within the bone when used on another person, so it was certainly an important moment for Shin Woo as well. He softly placed the bone atop Jin's head, who was gently closing his eyes and concentrating, and activated bone reinforcement. At that moment, the magic knowledge and the immense magic within flooded Jin's mind and instantly filled it to the brim. Executing bone reinforcement on Jin Taylor by consuming the LV6 skeleton high wizard, Penetra's skull. No, you can take this much. It'll end soon. What about you? Shin Woo calmly bore with the countless, confusing memories and organized them one by one. He accepted the information that wouldn't be helpful to Jin, and helped him to absorb the knowledge that would help him to utilize mana. If it weren't for his joint research with Kratia, this would have been difficult for him as well, but now that wasn't so. He hadn't become a magician. He'd just become very familiar with the method in which they accumulate their knowledge and skills. The Empire's magic is too outdated. Why didn't my teacher tell me his plans and leave on his own? A royal magician? They're just worms without a speck of talent. There were some fragmented memories that came along with the experiences that he judged to be ineffectual and unimportant. He was absolutely sure that the original owner of this bone possessed a sharp temper and was quite arrogant. Big talk for someone who died when he was only level 6. However, there would be a place where he could use these magic patterns, so he at least decided to memorize all of them. Since a joker could absorb one thing, mix it together with something else, and create 3 or 4 new things. Jin Taylor is reinforced through bone reinforcement. A significant amount of memories and experiences are divided and shared. Magic has increased by 3. Low-rank fire has become LV7. Bone reinforcement was successful. Because the bone's original owner used fire magic, Shin Woo's fire element had leveled up. It was the first element he'd acquired, and humiliatingly, it was also the lowest level of his elements, but if he leveled it up just a few more times, it would be at the intermediate rank, and would exhibit a similar level of power as acid or lightning. How about you? It seemed like he was a magician who specialized in fire rain, so did you get a skill similar to that? Nope. I'm sad. I'd rather be the falling rain. Because he was dealing with the awful deluge of magic and knowledge, Jin became way too sensitive. Although Shin Woo picked out and organized only the helpful parts, it was a level 6 bone, so the original owner's thoughts and power were on another level. Shin Woo. It's way too hard for me to absorb magician's bones. This much magic knowledge is plenty, so couldn't you just give me a stupid warrior's bone instead? I guess it can't be helped. Then let's go with a monster without intellect instead. Since elite magician's bones were really rare, he only had 2 anyway. But he did have several monster bones which emitted tremendous amounts of mana that Jin couldn't refuse. Jin Taylor is reinforced through bone reinforcement. A large portion of memories and experiences are divided and absorbed. Magic has increased by 2. Proficiency in the intermediate mana bone skill has increased by 9%. Jin Taylor is reinforced through bone reinforcement. A large portion of memories and experiences are divided and absorbed. Magic has increased by 1, and strength by 2. Proficiency in the intermediate mana bone skill has increased by 4%. Jin Taylor is reinforced through bone reinforcement. A large portion of memories and experiences are divided and absorbed. Magic has increased by 4. Because he'd absorbed 10 bones in a row, Jin looked half dead. They were level 6 bones, plus they were all bones focused on magic, which Jin lacked in, so his magic stat had increased by almost 200. Shin Woo had gotten a portion of those stats and his own magic increased by 30, so nothing else needed to be said. Moreover, his fire element increased by another level, so now it was at low rank level 8. Shin Woo trembled at the power of money. So thrilling, so refreshing. Money truly is the best. I'd rather die. Kill me. I'm done with your share, so just keep rolling over there. While Shin Woo's fire element was the only thing that leveled up, it seemed as though Jin gained 3 or 4 new skills. Most of them were skills that supplemented his magic, so they should help him use Steelheart from now on. Jin would have to develop and evolve those skills in a direction that suited his growth. It's my turn now. Shin Woo examined each of the lined up 14 bones in order. The level 7 bone was the main dish, so he had removed it for later, and the other 13 bones were placed in order by how much mana they emitted. If there were one thing he regretted, it was that all the level 6 bones seemed much weaker compared to the level 6 bone he'd gotten in the past, the weapon trickster's bone. I suppose that's obvious. It seems like the weapon trickster was an extremely rare karma, and it was also the reward of an important quest. He decided to accept it, as the bone he'd acquired as a quest reward was just that good. Shin Woo carefully reached his hand towards a bone. It was a red bone. Amongst the bones, it seemed like it would increase his health significantly. Bone reinforcement. Executing bone reinforcement by consuming the LV6 Big Mino Fighter, Elder's Head Horns. Health has increased by 14, and strength by 3. You have learned the active skill, LV8 Low-Rank Twin Horn Charge. Grr. My charge won't stop until it breaks either you or me. Mino Charge Commander, Elder. Huh. He thought that it would be impossible for him to learn new skills the more he and his skills leveled up, because the scope of his skills became wider, but that was just arrogance at work. Until now, he'd relied on Jin's charge skill, but now he had his own charge-related skill. Twin Horn Charge. Shin Woo said softly, and 2 tough horns, comprised of mana, formed atop his bone helm. At the same time, he felt as though someone was forcefully pushing him from behind. He would let the skill take over, dash forward, and strike his opponent with the twin horns. That was the technique. You're really like a monster. Nothing new. Jin, who had stopped rolling on the floor, looked at Shin Woo and gave him his honest opinion. Shin Woo replied curtly and deactivated the skill. It was definitely a good skill that would increase the power of his charges, but it wasn't really his type of skill. However, he had a chance to refine this skill. Fortunately, the mana pattern that manifests this skill isn't very complicated. You charge quickly with the Twin Horn Charge skill, and simultaneously focus your strength in the horns. The minnows created this skill for that very reason. If I change that part around a bit, then I might be able to. He didn't think for very long. Shin Woo was really eager to work on the skill, but it wasn't that easy to solve. It was more important to absorb the rest of the bones for now. Executing bone reinforcement by consuming the LV6 Great Hornet's reinforced exoskeleton. Agility has increased by 8 and magic by 4. Proficiency in the intermediate acid skill has increased by 27%. Proficiency in the intermediate bursting thunder skill has increased by 11%. Executing bone reinforcement by consuming the LV6 Corpse Eater's Jawbone. Strength has increased by 5 and health by 11. Proficiency in the Rule of Bone skill has increased by 16%. Proficiency in the bone reinforcement skill has increased by %. The LV6 Detoris's Toe Bone. Each level 6 elite monster possessed their own inherent quality and growth. In the process of absorbing their various skills, Shin Woo's skills advanced more than he'd thought they would. Amongst them, this was the greatest one. Executing bone reinforcement by consuming the LV6 Bewitcher's Rib Bone. Health has increased by 7 and magic by 9. Proficiency in the acting, disguise, and instigate skills have increased by 19%. A Bewitcher was a rare monster that used their own mana to captivate and control their enemies. They used a type of mana that possessed an extremely dangerous property, and when he absorbed its bone, the proficiency of all 3 of his Joker's innate skills increased. Shin Woo learned quite a bit from that. A Bewitcher's mana. If I can master this mana, I should be able to grow significantly as a Joker. Of course, it wasn't that easy. If he were able to proficiently use a Bewitcher's mana by just absorbing 1 bone, then Shin Woo wouldn't have had to study a golem's mana for so long. But it's true that I've gotten a hold of a hint. If I meet another one of these later, then Shin Woo engraved the Bewitcher's pattern that both manifested and controlled their mana deep within his mind. He promised he would practice using the Bewitcher's mana pattern the next time he used his Joker skills. He now only had 1 bone remaining. It was none other than the level 6 Magician's Finger Bone that Jin had refused. You didn't change your mind, right? Don't come this way with that thing. All right. Jin was really startled, and continuously rolled on the floor. Seeing that, Shin Woo snickered and activated bone reinforcement. Then, executing bone reinforcement by consuming the LV6 Royal Magician, Salon von Betadorn's Finger Bone. You have exceptional compatibility with the target, so the skill is a resounding success. Magic has increased by 14. Absorbing Salon von Betadorn's experiences and memories more deeply. The message, which he'd only seen once before, was accompanied with a sudden surge in his interior mana. When had he seen that message before? Right. It was when he'd absorbed the anti-skull cooperator, Jarrett's bone. He'd succeeded in preserving his memories, but the moment Shin Woo sported a joyous expression, his consciousness faded. It was an extremely dark, underground secret room. It had the same vibe as the anti-skull secret facilities he'd found. You're a disappointment, Jarrett. Senior. He could hear the 2 men's voices through his ears. One of their voices was familiar, and the other was unfamiliar. Senior Betadorn? Did you really have to go this far? It would have been better had we had just taken it easy. At that moment, Shin Woo's consciousness became clear. He quickly realized what kind of situation he was in, perhaps because this was his second time experiencing this. Hadn't he experienced something like this when he had absorbed the level 4 magician, Jarrett's bone? It was a playback of memories that came about due to bone reinforcement's resounding success. As he acquired the much too clear memories and experiences, he would feel a sense of unity with the bone's original owner, to the point that he felt one with them. Jarrett's here too. Seeing the owner of a bone he'd absorbed right before him was quite a strange sight. Moreover, it looked like Jarrett was heavily injured, causing his feelings to abate. The perpetrator was the one whose consciousness he was inhabiting, Salon von Betadorn. Take it easy. Senior, you don't understand the true nature of your research. You're the one who doesn't understand, Jarrett. Salon sighed and drew his mana. He felt the immense mana saturating Salon's body whirl around him, increase in power, and focus into one hand. Eventually, what manifested in his hand was a high-ranking magic, one which Shin Woo couldn't understand at all. That, Kahak. The moment light radiated from his fingertips, Jarrett wasn't even able to resist and fell to the floor, as if he had been bound. Perhaps it restricted both one's body and mana, as Jarrett's mana peculiarly didn't respond thereafter. Senior. In the end, do you really have to go this far? I hoped that I wouldn't have to kill one of my precious juniors. I'll ask you one last time. Selen's voice was ice cold. Shin Woo could feel the torrent of mana that amassed in his palms so well that he trembled. He had felt this from Kracia as well, but his mana couldn't compare with that of a level 6 magician's. Tell me what you know about the Anti-Skull organization in detail. Who's in charge? Don't you already have an idea as to who? A portion of his mana extended like an arrow and severed one of Jarrett's arms. Selen's eyes were tinged with spite. You're missing the point, Jarrett. You're a magician. You're the one who's missing the point, Senior. Is that really what you think? Then can you really say you're not? You fool. You only think about yourself. It was only for a mere moment, but he felt Selen's eyes look upon Jarrett with an unbearable amount of loathing and contempt. Even whilst groaning in pain, he suddenly yelled at him. I'm not the only one. You'll kill not just me, but the entire empire itself. Everyone's crazy. Eternal life? That's just an illusion. We know that already. If it were that easy to attain, it wouldn't be eternal life. Then why? Who? Jarrett's throat was congested with blood. However, Salon wouldn't speak on Jarrett's terms any longer. Was it because he'd decided that there was nothing he could gain from speaking to Jarrett? Once more, mana was concentrated within his hand. Unfortunately, the pattern he used to control his mana wasn't very different. However, experiencing his smooth and skilled technique of handling mana would help Shin Woo for a long time to come. I didn't really need to get any information from you. I was just trying to give you an opportunity, as we were once alumni. You have only yourself to blame, Jarrett. You're making the wrong choice. Selen's magic shot in a straight line. The focus of such magic was to burn away the opponent's magic, and said magic would overpower the opponent with solely mana quantity. Obviously, Jarrett wasn't able to resist the spell and vanished. Ultimately, only 2 bones that radiated light remained. This is a keepsake of his teacher, huh? He sacrificed himself for the Empire. You respected him so much, yet you joined an organization like Anti-Skull. Salon mulled over whether he should incinerate the 2 bones, and ultimately, he decided against it and placed them within his breast pocket. Shin Woo recollected that Jarrett had collected his teacher's bone and had now realized something. I might have already absorbed Jarrett's teacher's bone. Shin Woo's consciousness became dim after that final realization. Even till the very end, Salon was gripped by anger and a bitter regret. What exactly caused Salon to be so angry, and why did he agree to cooperate with the Emperor when he didn't think that eternal life was possible? Unfortunately, Shin Woo couldn't find the answers to these questions and was dragged back to the present. Since it wasn't something he could know just yet, you have become skilled in drawing your mana without any waste. The intermediate mana bone skill has become LV5, and mana has increased by 20. You have become able to more adeptly absorb the mana around you. Salon von Betadorn was definitely extremely talented. Since Shin Woo's mana bone skill, which had leveled up to level 4 from his exchange with Kracia, had leveled up again. However, Shin Woo couldn't feel happy about that forever. Seeing Jarrett's death, as well as the confrontation between Anti-Skull and the researchers for eternal life, caused him unease. Furthermore, everything that Salon had said had bothered him. At that very moment, a quest appeared, as if it understood him. A quest has occurred. Anti-Skull's objective? The horrific curse that came about due to the Emperor's struggle for eternal life. Anti-Skull did everything they could to stop it, but they ultimately failed. And you have successfully caught a few glimpses of their actions. However, that's not enough. Somewhere in the Empire, they're still waiting for their time to strike. Find a member of Anti-Skull who is an executive or higher to get closer to finding out the secret of the Empire. Quest rewards 3 permits to God's secret shop, a corresponding amount of perium. It's been a long time since I've gotten a quest. This quest was incomparably vague compared to the quest he'd begrudgingly accepted from God. Also, the words were cryptic. It didn't even tell him where the anti-skull members were located, nor did it tell him what to do once they met. It was a really unfriendly ending. He sported a sour expression as he looked over the quest once more, and Jin, who seemed to be done rolling on the floor. He sported a sour expression as he looked over the quest again. Jin, who seemed done rolling on the floor, stood up, dusted himself off, walked over, and asked, "You got a quest, right?" "Yeah. So you're at the level now that you can sense this flow of mana, huh? I'm proud of you. You know, that tone of yours kind of pisses me off." However, his abilities concerning magic were nothing compared to Shin Woo's. Plus, Shin Woo was the reason he was able to increase his magic this far, so he couldn't really retort very strongly. Finding no alternative, Jin promised to get revenge by shaking like crazy once Shin Woo rode on him next. "You don't have to worry about it too much, as it's a quest that I can't really do anything about right now. This guy's more important than the quest right now. The secret to the Empire's curse? That's important. Anti-skull? That's important too. Level 5 intermediate mana bone? That's obviously important." However, he held something more important than all of those. It was the only level 7 elite bone that he'd bought from the secret shop. When you think about it, that probably means that there aren't that many high-leveled heroes. You told me that most heroes only hunt monsters that are a level lower than them. When you think about it that way, doesn't that mean that there's at least one level 8 hero? They told me that this bone entered the shops dozens of years ago. Ah, that meant that there weren't any level 8 heroes right now. Of course, Shin Woo didn't approach the subject so simply. A level 8 hero may not have encountered a level 7 elite monster, they may have defeated it and a bone didn't drop, or they may have encountered a level 7 elite, but decided against fighting it, as they didn't think that there was any need to fight it. Well, this bone is what's important right now. I respect your bravery. Jin saluted him, as Shin Woo was attempting to absorb a level 7 elite bone. It was already difficult to absorb a bone that was one level higher, yet he was absorbing a bone 2 levels higher. Seeing that, Shin Woo chuckled and grabbed the giant, Fenno's bone. Befitting a giant, the bone was enormous. It was longer than the Drake Horn Lance. It was about 4 meters in length, was incredibly tough, and there was a horrific amount of mana concentrated within. My consciousness shouldn't get sucked in again, right? Shin Woo resolved himself, and after calming himself down as much as possible, he executed bone reinforcement. At that moment, the shin bone broke apart into pieces and pervaded his entire body, not his shin. The giant, Fenno's shin bone reinforces your entire body. Strength has increased by 30, health by 20, and magic by 15. Absorbing a significant portion of the target's memories and experiences. What a relief. He didn't get a playback of the giant's memories. The giant was much too detached and overpowering for Shin Woo to share his senses with. Shin Woo thought of it as watching a movie. Perhaps it was because it was a level 7 bone, but the memories within were almost completely intact when absorbed by Shin Woo. Shin Woo thought about the frightening product of a giant's body and magic, and wondered whether it would be possible for him as well. A giant's mana. Their bodies are built larger and sturdier, and this is probably some type of authority. I don't know what the basis for it is, but all of their mana is concentrated in reinforcing and enlarging their bodies, so I could say that there's a certain harmony between magic and body at work here. A huge body saturated with overpowering mana. They would infuse these two powers into their weapons in their entirety and swing them. This was a giant's power. Shin Woo clearly memorized it all. The powerful flow of mana that whirled around their bodies, the properties of said mana, as well as the chemical process that occurred as that mana touched the body. His body didn't even compare to a giant's body, but he would at least be able to use that mana someday. I am descended from the giants. I said I'm a descendant of the giants, Fennos. A descendant of the giants. He didn't know what exactly that meant, but for some reason, that line was engraved deep within his mind. That memory was what finished the bone reinforcement, as well as inheriting the will of a mortal who attempted to reach the realm of God. Low-rank Avenger has been terminated. You have acquired the special passive skill, LV1 Rebellion. All stats have increased by 5. Huh. He'd acquired a skill he hadn't expected at all. You have fought against all who have stood in your way. This is an expression of rage towards God, who brought you to this illogical world. At the same time, it is also a desperate struggle to find the essence of who you are. Rebellion is a skill that uses strong emotions as fuel, the final destination of all skills. You resist in any unfair situation and will never surrender. You can use this ability when you are ambushed, fight against an opponent a higher level than you, or fight against several opponents. Whenever you attempt to overcome a particular situation with another, the effect of rebellion will be further increased, based on your connection with the other. You became undead through contract fraud. You intend to rebel against this situation. All stats are increased by 10% at all times. This effect is also shared with the contracted, Jin Taylor, who is also in the same situation. Ah, so this is what I get. Shin Woo felt the energy within his body rise and sported a troubled expression. Jin, who suddenly gained an increase in ability due to their contract, was also completely shocked and leapt up suddenly. What is this? What the hell is this? We just got skill that gives us a way to fight back. Though he explained the core of the matter, Jin unfortunately didn't really understand. Shin Woo couldn't be bothered, so he just explained it away as a special buff, and Jin could understand that much. Rebellion, huh? Changing one's emotions into power was good enough for it to be called a highest level, max, skill. Since the moment he gained the skill, his stats increased by 10% because he was a skeleton. It was probably able to manifest in this form because it had fused with his previous Avenger skill. Truthfully, its effect was quite similar to the Avenger skill. It was quite a versatile skill compared to Avenger, which was way too choosy as to when it could be used. If there are several special situations overlapping, it may increase my abilities by as much as a level. Moreover, the skill level is still at level 1, so the growth is limitless. TCH, is that it? He'd secretly wanted an active skill befitting a giant that would reverse a situation in one go, so he was slightly disappointed, but since he knew just how important stats were in this world, he soon changed his mind. Moreover, he hadn't completely lost a hold of a giant's ability. Since he'd memorized the flow of mana within Fenno's body, as well as how he utilized it, he would be able to use that method someday soon. He hadn't given up on his dream to turn into a giant. Fine. In any case, I only have 600 stats to go before I hit level 6. You monster. Now it's time for us to go. You have a place in mind, right? Yep. Honestly, he had a lot of places to choose from. It sounded fun taking control of all the golems in the various areas, and it wouldn't be bad to start exterminating some of the undead heroes for God's quest. If not, he could use the faint memories held within the bones he'd absorbed to find the bewitchers or giants, which he didn't feel would be a waste of his time. However, we have to go somewhere first. To be honest, I acquired some interesting info in the process of wiping out Vita's core. In the process of directly or indirectly absorbing the memories of all the undead in the core, he'd gained detailed information on one of the Empire's 12 generals, Mentawful. He knew where the undead general was right at this very moment, as well as the movements of the soldiers he led. You've got guts. Oh wait, never mind. Quote, it seems like you're misunderstanding me right now. I'm not crazy enough to go fight one of the 12 generals myself. I just got a hold of some interesting info while I was going through the memories. You don't still think that the way you think is normal, do you? Shin Woo looked at the uneasy Jin, grinned, and explained. Vita's core was supposed to be double its size. However, he lost half of his troops while they were on the move. Why do you think these guys died? On the way, they encountered treasure eaters holding a choir competition? Funny, but no. There's something more formidable there. Shin Woo said and nodded as if satisfied, but seeing that, Jin's goblin fire swayed uneasily. You're not saying that we're going to go kill those formidable guys, are you? Bingo! Stop, you crazy bastard! You just said that they killed half of the core. Nope. Jin, listen closely. Shin Woo experienced the same anguish that all the undead had felt, and that source was none other than acid. It was such a powerful acid that it melted away the bones filled to the brim with mana and nullified it. It was definitely a more powerful acid than the one used by the Great Slime or the Acid Ghoul. Vitas thought he might have to sustain heavy casualties to escape and ended up sacrificing half of his troops. Then, he turned his core around and marched. Why? It's because most skeletons don't possess acid resistance. Jin already realized what Shin Woo was trying to say. Shin Woo spoke in a strong-willed tone, as if he wouldn't take back his decision, regardless of what Jin said. But we have it. We have acid resistance. You said it had stronger acid than the Acid Ghoul. Jin, a person can't lose their aspirations. Just because we increased our magic or physical strength a little bit doesn't mean we should keep fighting against skeletons or golems. If we do, we'll eventually face an opponent that can use a powerful element that cannot be overcome with just stats, and that'll be our ticket to the afterlife. We're going to the afterlife right now. Right now? Oh, come on. I keep telling you not to worry. He had been feeling troubled because he hadn't had much of an opportunity to train his regeneration skill lately, as most of his fights would end in a single round. However, he'd gotten information that there were monsters that used acid that inhabited a particular region, so he couldn't not be happy. Then the reason you're not telling Kreisha about it is, yeah, she's definitely strong, but she's not really helpful when I want to train my skills. That was the expected response. Jin was sure that he wouldn't be able to change Shin Woo's mind, now that he'd made his decision, so he weakly asked. So, who are they? The ones that use acid? A hyper-ultra-acid ghoul? Nope. Trees. Trees. Jin couldn't understand at all and tilted his head, but Shin Woo couldn't really say anything else to clear it up for him. Because according to their memories, the undead had indeed been killed by the acid poison spewed out by the numerous trees in the forest. In any case, they're trees, so they can't move, and there's no way it'll be a waste of time. That's why I want to go there first. They're trees. So can you even get something from slaughtering all those trees? Aren't they just plants? You've adapted quite well to this world now, haven't you? The fact that every action remains as karma. Don't worry, it definitely won't be a waste of time. After he had roughly explained the location, as well as their objective there, Shin Woo lightly kicked off the ground and embarked on Jin's back. Jin turned his body to the direction of their destination, even as he sighed. Due to the assimilation skill, he didn't need to be told where to go. With your speed, it shouldn't even take a few hours. Is this really a good idea? After the two skeleton heroes were finished with everything, they finally left Kahabi. Due to Jin's speed, the sight of the city quickly became distant, and eventually, around the time they could only see it as a speck, Shin Woo sighed. That kind of feeling. The sigh was mixed with both regret and relief. In a short time, they had not only purified the city, but also discovered a winery nearby, met an elf hero, and even exterminated a corps under the direct command of one of the 12 generals. However, to Shin Woo the most important moment was when he exchanged information and knowledge with Kreisha. Because of her, my magic fundamentals increased significantly too. It also wasn't bad that he had secured an ally and a talented hero. Furthermore, Jin, who was in a similar situation to him, gained a sense of emotional stability, as well as other emotions from her due to their talks, though he wasn't able to tell her that because he was shy, she played a huge part in helping him. Though he had become a joker who fabricated his own feelings, it didn't mean that he didn't need his feelings. Rather, it was because he had to do so that the exchange of feelings was so important. Kreisha had filled in that deficit for him. You're thinking about Kreisha right now, aren't you? Then Jin, who had silently been running, suddenly opened his mouth and spoke. Because they weren't deeply using the assimilation skill, Shin Woo responded a bit surprised. You're really sharp. The fact that you're talking about Kracia means that you like her, right? Ah, what is it? Why are you shaking? The ground's just bumpy, that's all. Jin lied unconvincingly and harassed Shin Woo. As expected, did Jin have some sort of complicated feelings for Kracia? The feelings didn't seem romantic, but he couldn't really make any sort of guess. With those complicated feelings, he accessed the chatting channel. It had halfway become a habit to access the chatting channel when he traveled long distances. Mr. Shin Woo has entered. Lloyd HK. Oh, I was worried, but you came out safe. Shin Woo. It's a relief that you're safe, Senior. I was able to escape beforehand because of Senior Arian. No matter how complicated he was feeling, as soon as he accessed the chatting channel, he would unhesitatingly and skillfully begin to lie. If he were to say, actually, I killed them all, it would become quite troublesome. Prince Altania, I would have been able to take care of them. Lloyd HK. Though you might be able to inflict a lot of damage with a preemptive strike, it would be difficult for you to win against the entire corps. You're still quite a ways away from level 7, right? Let's not be unreasonable until we hit level 7. Prince Altania. Yasunori Akira. It requires quite a bit of courage to realize that you can't do something and back off. Good job, Shin Woo. He didn't even run, yet he was being complimented for running. Shin Woo wanted to get out of this situation as soon as possible. However, he had just entered, so he couldn't just exit immediately with the excuse that their attention was too burdensome on him. Like always, he would need to bear with it a bit more so that he could hear what's going on from his seniors. However, Shino Rendu. But there are also situations where you can't run away, no matter how much you want to. Lloyd HK. Shino. Mentes Orin, are you in danger? A senior he'd never seen before had appeared. Moreover, he seemed like quite the veteran. However, now didn't seem like the time to introduce himself and say that it's nice to meet him. Shino Rendu's voice was unusual. Prince Altania. Hey, it hasn't even been very long since Yi Jin almost died. I thought you were good at running away. Shino Rendu. Those pointless provocations of yours feel quite warm right now. But I don't think I'll last very long this time. I think I've been caught by one of the 12 generals. Lloyd HK. What? You. Mentes Orin. You should all know that the undead communicate with each other, starting from the level 3 danger zones. It's possible to get caught by one of the 12 generals if they're close by. And we've already told you guys about that once. Shino Rendu, I'm not trying to blame you, Senior. Honestly, I'm not trying to blame anyone. Yasunori Akira, you musclehead. Even Yasunori Akira, who always spoke coldly, spoke in a withdrawn voice. So much so that Shin Woo could even hear his voice break. The mood was becoming the same as when Yi Jin requested for help. Of all the times that Shin Woo could enter the chatting channel, this was the worst. He clicked his tongue. Moreover, he was caught by one of the 12 generals, so no matter who went, no one would be able to help him. Shino Rendu. Newbie. No. Shin Woo. Shin Woo. Yes, Senior. Shino Rendu. Don't die like me. Don't overdo it for the sake of quickly advancing. Since the only thing on our side here is time. Shin Woo. I'll keep that in mind. Shino Rendu. Is Sarah not here right now? Someone please tell Sarah that I always yearned for her. I know her heart's frozen and she won't accept anyone, but in the end, Prince Altania. You surprise me, even to the very end. That's the kind of thing that hurts people the most, you idiot. Shino Rendu. And, no, that's enough. At any rate, I was given a second chance at life. It's been great. With that, Shino Rendu left the chatting channel. No one said anything, but then, Prince left without a word. Following him, Akira left, and then Lloyd. Shin Woo was about to leave the channel, but the final remaining senior stopped him. Mentes Orin. You're Shin Woo, right? When you hit level 6, send me a private chat. I'll tell you about some level 3 danger zones that you can go through relatively safely. Shin Woo. Thank you, Senior. Mentes Oren. It's been a long time since I last entered the channel, but I feel really shitty. I'm going to go drink the wine that's new at the shop now. Damn it. Finally, that senior left as well. This senior wasn't superfluous, nor did he have any sort of suspicious, secret plan. He just purely wanted to help his junior as much as he could. The fact that that senior was so sick of entering the chatting channel must have meant that countless heroes have died in the Empire. Then, there's another one now. There was another mark indicating a new undead hero on his minimap. He would be able to get there in 2 days with Jin. And that meant that it was highly likely that Shino Rendu was killed by the mercenary king, Metafel, of the 12 generals. I can't go that way for now. To think that he was thinking this way, despite the fact that Shino Rendu, a senior that he'd conversed with a few times, had died. Shin Woo was surprised by his composure and smiled bitterly. Then, he left the chatting channel. There was still a bit of distance remaining until he reached the forest containing the trees that spewed acid poison,